The story starts a long time ago with an old drawing of heroes, showing how a legendary party once teamed up with monsters to stop huge disasters. This crew was known everywhere as Legion, and the guy leading the whole group was Shion, the translator of all things. He and his friends spent their days doing the impossible together, and this is the story of how Shion and his companions made history. But then everything changes when Shion's teammate says she's sorry, but he's kicked out, leaving Shion to slam his fist on the table and ask why this is happening. He reminds her they promised to reach A rank as a team, but he just keeps shouting that she knows that's the truth. The leader of the Golden Fleece, a guy named Jason, starts yelling. He tells Shion he's just not good enough, and a hero like him needs much better teammates than what Shion can offer. Jason says he knows how hard the guy is trying, but Shion clenches his fist, reminding him they've been friends since they were kids, and he's done everything to keep up. Jason doesn't care. He shouts that Shion's gift isn't built for combat and calls him half-baked at basically everything from swords to magic, making Medea step in to finish the job. She's another member of the group and doesn't hold back at all. She looks him in the eye and tells him he's just a burden, which really hits home. She brings up how he couldn't even land a solid hit on a troll during their last quest. Shion looks down and admits she's right, but tries to argue that he was at least a perfect decoy for them. And as he looks at his teammates, he realizes they're looking at his whole track record, not just one fight. He has to admit to himself that he really doesn't have any skills that can actually finish a fight. He stares at his hands, all scarred and rough from years of work. It's not like he's been lazy or slacking on his training, but he knows deep down his sword skills will never be on Jason's level. Plus, he can't use the high-level magic Medea use or the healing stuff their other teammate Asu can do. It's a tough spot to be in, and Shion starts to realize his special gift might have reached its limit. Medea just stares at him with those cold eyes. She says the party is moving on to A rank now, and their plan is to turn Jason into a legendary hero. She tells him straight up that with a gift like Universal Translator, there's no way he can keep up with the crazy battles they have coming next. Medea tells Shion he just can't keep up anymore. Shion looks down, finally accepting that they've already made up their minds. He asks if Asu knows they're kicking him out too, wondering if the whole team is really on board. Jason gets defensive and stammers that he's already told her. Shion ignores him and speaks to Medea directly. She doesn't blink, telling him she's serious and that everyone in the group agreed on this decision. She starts walking away, simply saying his name and thanking him for everything he's done for them so far. Shion stands there alone, clenching his fist as he realizes she's right about him. He calls out to them one last time. He tells Jason not to get too cocky, then asks Medea to look after him, and she says of course she will since she's basically Jason's right hand now anyway. Jason loses his temper and yells that he doesn't need any advice. He tells Shion that losers like him should just get lost. Jason shouts at him to leave all their items and gold behind. Shion looks crushed, but says he'll deliver everything to the guild later. Hold up. Smash like and subscribe for more hidden manga gems. Now, I dare you to comment, I'm loving it. I bet most of you won't do it. Alright, let's continue. In this world, being an adventurer is a real job where people do everything from hunting monsters to searching for treasure. But it's all based on a ranking system that goes from apprentice level all the way up to legends who have saved the world. Shion admits he was just like everyone else, aiming for that elite hero rank, as he tells a bartender he needs another drink. He stumbles through the city streets with a bottle in his hand, thinking about how his old party is actually the top-rated group in town, and he remembers how it all started back in their small hometown, just him and his childhood friends Jason and Ath, heading out to make it big. They weren't always strong though, and back then even a couple of basic goblins were enough to give the whole team a hard time. Shion was always there to have Jason's back, especially whenever the guy would lose his cool and go on one of his usual rampages. Somehow they made it work, and once Medea joined the squad, their reputation and careers finally started blowing up. But while everyone else kept getting better, Shion realized he'd stopped growing entirely. He just couldn't keep pace with the rest of them anymore. He clenches his fist in frustration, knowing the only reason he's stuck like this is because of the weird gift he was born with. In this world, everyone's born with a gift, basically a random power that just shows up one day and pretty much decides your whole future. Shion lies there staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd be happier if he never became an adventurer at all. He looks down at his card, wishing his power was actually useful for fighting instead of what he got, and thinks back to when they were just kids playing together back before everything got so complicated. Moving on, Shion heads over to the Adventurers Guild, where someone is yelling for a girl named Yumi as he pushes open the heavy front doors and steps inside the main hall. The second he walks in, the whole room starts whispering. People are pointing him out as the guy who just got kicked out of the Golden Fleece. Some guys start laughing, saying it's about time he got the boot since a translator had no business being in a top-tier group anyway. The trash talk keeps coming, with people saying the only reason he was even there was because his friends felt sorry for him, making Shin visibly shake until Yumi finally snaps. She yells at everyone to shut up because adventurers shouldn't be treating each other like garbage. Angelina tells the noisy crowd to clear out, and the guys finally start scattering and heading back to their own business. She turns to see Shin standing there. She's a guild staffer named Angelina and lets him know she's glad she found him. Angelina says she's already heard the news about him getting kicked out, so she asks him to follow her to the back to talk in private. Once they're alone, Shin hands over all the money and gear he had from his old group. She takes it, officially checking it into the guild's records. Angelina gets pretty annoyed though. She says that after everything he did for the Golden Fleece, he shouldn't even have to give this stuff back. Shin just stares at his hands, admitting Jason was right about his lack of fighting power. He thinks he'd be lucky to hit D rank alone. But Angelina isn't having any of that self-doubt and yells out that he's completely wrong about himself. She looks him right in the eyes and says that in her expert opinion, he's easily a C-rank adventurer even without a party. She even offers to hook him up with another top-tier B-rank group right away, which has Shin feeling a little overwhelmed by her kindness. Shin gently tells her he wants to try the solo life for a bit first, making her realize she was being a bit too pushy as she quickly apologizes. Shin looks a lot more determined now, saying he really wants to test what he can actually do on his own. He tells Angelina that her support gave him the push he needed, and Angelina realizes this is the perfect timing. So she calls his name and says she actually has a specific quest she wants him to handle. She pulls out a folder and explains there's been a sudden outbreak of orcs in some nearby caves. She asks him if he'd be willing to head over there to clear some of them out, and reminds him that if he brings back the ears like he usually does, she'll make sure he gets a solid bounty for the job. But she's got a special request too. She asks if he can check out the deep parts of the cave using that method he has. She knows it's extra work, so she promises to pay him a separate bonus for the investigation on top of the regular reward. Angelina reaches out and tells him she's going to keep repeating herself until he believes it, because she's seen how much effort he's put in for his old group and the guild. She gives him a big, warm smile while holding his hand, promising that even if things suck right now, something great is bound to happen. She's seen enough adventurers to know for sure. Shin turns bright red and stammers out a thank you, but then he totally loses his cool and asks if she'll go to dinner with him before immediately backtracking and saying he's just joking. Angelina just stands there completely frozen and shocked, screaming at herself in her head about what she's even saying to him. Angelina lets Shin know she's got two conditions for this job. The first one is that he has to make it back in one piece, and Shin starts to ask what the second one is when she winks and tells him he has to take her out to a really good restaurant. She gives him a playful look, asking if they've got a deal, and Shin is so hyped he literally jumps for joy as he heads out, shouting at the top of his lungs. He makes his way over to the town's carriage stop to catch a ride out to the dungeon, and while he's there, one of the horses notices he's in a great mood and asks if something good happened. Shin says yeah, but the horse tells him to forget the small talk and just hand over a carrot. The horse adds that it really wants to eat some fresh green grass, so Shin just nods and says he's got it covered. He thinks to himself about how this is the way his translator gift actually works. It lets him talk to animals and even monsters, though he can't help wishing he'd ended up with a combat gift like Sword Saint instead. He knows if he had something meant for fighting, Jason and the rest of the group probably never would have kicked him out. But as he's sitting in the carriage, a group of rough-looking guys shows up and asks if he minds them sitting with him. The rough-looking guys in the carriage spot a girl sitting alone with her hood up, and one of them points out that she seems to be traveling by herself. He leans in and asks if she wants to join their group, promising her a fair split of whatever they find, but the guy starts laughing and adds that the deal includes nighttime activities too. Shin is just watching this play out, thinking the offer actually sounds okay until the girl shuts him down instantly. She tells him she's not into teaming up with anyone weaker than her, and even a little kid would be better at hitting on girls. The guy loses his cool immediately. He yells at her and pulls back a massive fist to shut her up, and Shin realizes this is about to turn into a disaster. But before the guy can even land a punch, the girl moves like a blur and flips him right over her shoulder. He slams onto the floor of the carriage, completely terrified. She pulls a blade on him and says if he keeps it up, she'll make sure he never takes another breath. The guy starts shaking, begging her to stop and claiming it was all just a joke. Shin is sitting right there in total shock. He realizes that her speed was actually on another level, even faster than Jason. The girl turns her focus toward him, and Shin tries to make sense of the situation, telling her the other adventurers would probably celebrate if she took the guy out, but then he corrects himself and says they'd actually attack her. He just scratches his head and tells her he'll keep that in mind, leaving the girl staring at him, wondering what he's even talking about. The hooded girl puts her sword away and says it was nothing, while Shin stands there wondering what just happened. But everyone starts heading their separate ways into the woods, so Shin just waves goodbye to the group and the mysterious girl. He stands on a dark cliffside holding a torch, telling himself it's time to pull things together and finally move out, and he finds a familiar face dripping from the cave wall. Shin says hello, and the slime replies that it's been a while since they last saw each other. Shin sits down to chat while the stray lime, snacks on some herbs. Shin realizes the little guy is actually in the middle of a solo exam, so Lime asks if Shin is planning to stay solo from now on. Shin tells him it's not forever, but he's curious why the slime is even asking. Lime gets straight to the point and asks if Shin would be willing to take him along on his journey. He double-checks that the annoying blonde leader and the gloomy mage are finally gone, because he really wants to go on an adventure with Shin. Shin is actually moved by the offer, looking at the little slime with a look of total appreciation. Lime starts joking about rescuing a princess one day, and just like that, the slime officially joins Shin's party. Lime hops along on Shin's shoulder as they start their trek, asking what exactly their plan is. Shin looks up at the bats in the cave, explaining they're investigating an orc outbreak and asks Lime if he's heard anything. So Lime thinks back and mentions he heard the orcs actually got themselves a brand new leader recently. The word is this new chieftain really hates humans, which is why orcs that usually stay hidden are now roaming all over. Shin realizes the whole pack's behavior flipped just because of one guy at the top, while Lime warns him to watch his back, and Shin agrees they'll need to be way more cautious with the investigation, thanking the little slime for the heads up. He spots a trio of goblins up ahead. They aren't a huge threat, but leaving them behind would just be a headache later on. So Shin reaches for his sword and asks Lime if he can go ahead and clear them out, since he can't stand how they always attack the second they see him. He moves in fast and tears right through the group with one clean swing of his blade, sheathing his sword. Shin tells Lime they're all done, and the slime gives him props for the quick work. Lime starts saying some weird stuff about a website, but Shin just pokes him and tells him to hold on since they only just met today. The little slime says Shin's name, and Shin just nods, confirming they're sticking to the plan they talked about earlier. He's walking through the dark cave with a torch when an arrow suddenly zips past and hits the ground right at his feet. So Shin stops moving and looks around at the shadows, asking what the hell the meaning of this is. A group of guys shows up, and the leader mocks Shin for acting so calm, calling him a washed-up B-rank adventurer who's gone to rot. Shin just looks at them and says he doesn't remember doing anything to make them this mad, recognizing them as the guys from the tavern. The leader yells at him to shut up, saying Shin's old captain made them look like total idiots and now they're taking it out on him. Shin realizes Jason is still causing him trouble even after the exile, saying the guy has always been bad at making people understand him. He tells them they're only picking on him because he's alone, and that being cowards is exactly why they're all stuck at C rank. He admits that fighting 8 guys at once is going to be a huge pain, but then he turns back and asks if they're actually sure about this. Shin reminds the group that the guild has strict rules against adventurers fighting each other, but the bald leader just laughs and asks who actually gives a damn about the rules. He leans in with a nasty look, saying that if Shin just drops dead in this cave, there won't be anyone left to go report them anyway. Shin doesn't even look scared, just tells them that if they're going to be like that, he doesn't have any reason to hold back anymore. The cave goes totally silent for a second, and even though Shin is just standing there with his torch, the leader starts looking a little bit nervous. He tries to shake it off by yelling at Shin to stop trying to scare them, asking what a loser with a translator gift could even do. Shin just gives him a cold smirk and says he's about to show them how a translator really fights. But the leader calls it a bluff and tells his boys to get him. Before they can move, this massive thumping sound starts echoing through the tunnel, making the goons freeze up and look around. That's when Lime comes flying into the light, shouting that the hero has arrived and apologizing for the wait since it took a minute to lead the orcs over. Shin yells out that the lure worked perfectly, while one of the guys realizes they're in deep trouble and screams that a whole pack of orcs is on them. The orcs come charging out of the dark, with the leader pointing and telling the pack to kill the humans because their chief is going to be happy about the catch. The bald leader is sweating bullets now, desperately asking Shin if they can just team up to survive. Shin gets his blade ready, saying he definitely doesn't want to die here. Even though he thinks these guys have some nerve, he looks at the 15 orcs and figures they can win if everyone fights for real, saying it would leave a bad taste in his mouth if the guys died. The plan is to back them up for a bit and then make a run for it as soon as there's an opening. Shin knocks an arrow out of the air, telling the old man to keep his head in the game because he spots the enemy leader in the back and tells everyone to target the big ones from a distance while they struggle to hold the line. Shin thinks it's almost time to bail, but then he notices the cave acting weird and asks what's happening. He points out to Lime that the bats are totally freaking out, asking if the slime can feel something dangerous coming, and Lime thinks he might be right. Suddenly someone yells about smelling a fight, making Lime wonder if that Yuya guy is finally showing up. A huge orc with a jagged knife charges straight into the light, screaming for everyone to let him in on the fun. The hooded figure slides right past the human line, heading straight for a voice that booms out, asking who the strongest person in the place is, which catches the old man and the orcs totally off guard. A jacked orc with a scarf starts screaming for someone to fight him. But Shin realizes that even with all that big talk, the other orc is right. Normal humans can't understand a word these monsters are saying. The bald guy loses his temper and tells the monster to shut its mouth, swinging his sword, but he gets cut down before he can even land a hit. Shin is losing it, seeing a C-rank adventurer killed instantly and wondering if this monster has a special gift. The orc lunges at Shin, saying he can tell just by the way he moves that he's the real powerhouse of the group. Shin shouts for Lime to get ready because the slime is already moving, saying he knows exactly what needs to be done, while the orc slams a heavy attack into Shin's sword, forcing him to block with everything he's got. The orc is completely shocked that Shin actually blocked his heavy hit, and he even admits that the guy isn't half bad. He tries to crush Lime under his massive foot, but the little slime is way too quick, so Lime just bounces away with a casual whoops, while the orc's stomp hits nothing but dirt. The orc gets a kick out of Shin having a tamed slime and tells him he's one of the most interesting humans he's seen. Then they start clashing swords again. Shin is struggling to hold him back and thinks this guy is a real piece of work. The more they fight, the more Shin starts to realize this monster might actually be way stronger than Jason. Suddenly Shin hears a voice in his ear bark out orders to run left and then right, and he moves exactly when he's told, dodging just in time for the hooded girl to fly in and take a swing at the monster. The girl says she knew it and points out that Shin is hearing her prophecy just fine, which means the two of them are finally standing together, ready to take this massive orc down for good. The hooded girl looks back at Shin and wonders if he's doing okay. Even though she's the one who just saved him, she actually calls him her savior. Shin tries to get a thank you out, but he's totally tripping over his words, mostly because he can't believe she just called him a savior. As he looks up at her, he's completely stunned by what he sees. Her hair is a shade of red that's brighter than any fire, and it just flows around her as the light hits it. Right then, things get serious as the girl stands there looking like a total pro with her cloak catching the wind. Her blade moves in a blur, cutting through the air with a sharp sound that makes Shin finally realize where he knows her from. She was definitely that mysterious person sitting in the carriage earlier. The orc is forced back and takes a knee while Shin and the girl stand together, ready to finish this fight in the middle of the cave. The girl looks pretty annoyed that the monster actually managed to deflect her strike, but the orc just grins and tells her she's actually not bad for a human girl. The orc growls that he won't forgive her for jumping into his fight, but admits this might actually make things more interesting. Meanwhile, Shin just stands there looking completely stressed out by the whole situation. The girl ignores the monster's talk, saying he's just babbling and asking if he's finally ready to actually fight, though deep down she's starting to wonder if this monster is just a total idiot. She draws her sword with a smooth motion, telling him she appreciates the offer, but she's decided to just finish him off right here and now. She flies forward with a huge strike, but the orc is fast enough to get his blade up and block her, making Shin freak out because he can't believe the monster actually countered her. The girl flips back through the air, finding the whole thing pretty interesting as the orc starts charging right at her. He lunges with his hand out to grab her, but she doesn't even blink. She just stays focused on his movement until she spins around and delivers a massive slash that cuts deep into the monster's side. She doesn't stop there though, immediately following up with more speed to land another heavy hit while he's down. The girl calls the orc a bastard, while he just growls back and calls her a little bitch. Both of them are actually smiling now, with the girl thinking the monster is way better than she expected. Shin watches the look on her face and realizes that both of these fighters are just absurdly strong, and even though he really wants to help out, he can't find a single opening to jump into the middle of their crazy back and forth. She's honestly impressed he can fend off her attacks this well, but the orc just gets more fired up and demands that she tells him her name. Suddenly, the monster reaches out and grabs her blade with his bare hand, which makes Shin freak out because he realizes the guy took a hit on purpose just to trap her. While Shin wonders what the monster is planning next, the girl decides she's ending this right now, unleashing a massive flame sword move that sets off a giant explosion. Shin is completely blown away by the girl's power. He can't believe she put out that much fire without even using a chant, and he starts wondering if that was her big finishing move. While Lime watches the smoke and thinks the orc has to be dead after a blast like that, Shin rushes over to check on the slime, just glad his friend is still in one piece. But as the smoke starts to clear, a pair of massive boots appear still standing on the ground. The girl looks back and can't believe the monster is still upright. The orc general stands there with a dark aura swirling around his body, telling her that since she showed him a move, he's going to return the favor right now. Shin watches the whole thing go down from the side, getting a bad feeling that the monster is about to do something crazy. Suddenly, the orc lunges forward with a massive heavy strike, It's so fast and powerful that the girl barely has time to realize how much trouble she's actually in. A giant blade goes spinning through the air, covered in blood from the force of the exchange. The weapon slams hard into the rock wall, vibrating from the impact while the orc stands over the girl. It turns out she managed to move just in time, narrowly escaping a hit that definitely would have ended things right there. And the orc looks at her and admits she's the very first person to ever dodge his Yuya Konkan move, and he seems almost impressed. The girl looks at the orc and admits he's not bad, since she really thought her last attack was going to be the end of him. But the monster doesn't give her a second to breathe, launching into another wild attack that catches her completely off guard. Lime yells out that the guy is acting totally weird, while Shion notices that even with all those wounds, the orc's speed and power are actually going up. As the girl struggles to stay in the fight, Lime makes a comment about how bad things are looking for her, and she starts to wonder if there's anything she can even do. The orc lets out a deafening roar right in her face, putting so much pressure on her that she can barely keep her guard up. The monster is just screaming and lost in the heat of the moment, and he stands tall over the girl, raising his weapon for a strike that looks like it's going to finish everything. Shion is completely horrified when he realizes the orc just cut down his own people, asking if he really just killed his own comrades like that. But the orc doesn't care at all, telling them to stay out of his way because nothing is going to stop his fight, leading Shion to wonder if this insane mindset is what people mean when they talk about a warrior's pride. But then he notices something else. The hooded girl stops and looks back. Something about the situation is making her uneasy as the orc actually speaks up, apologizing for all the trouble his partner caused everyone. Shion steps forward toward the fallen enemies and tells the orc warrior he's got something to say, which the girl doesn't get at all, asking him what he's even trying to do by talking to a monster like that. Shion keeps it simple and tells her to just leave this whole thing to him for a second. The orc asks if Shion is just another person getting in his way, but Shion tells him that's not it. He tells the monster he's got a proposal. He'll heal him up so they can restart the duel fairly. The girl is completely blown away, asking Shion what on earth he's thinking, but he just tells her to watch and reaches down to grab something while the girl watches in total confusion. Then Shion explains that if those wounds aren't treated, the orc is going to die right here, but if he gets healed, he lives to fight another day. Shion asks the orc how he's feeling after the healing, and the monster stands there while the dark energy around him fades. The orc looks down at his body, surprised to find that he actually feels fine. He starts flexing his fingers and making weird noises, realizing his wounds have completely vanished. The orc starts swinging his weapon around to test his strength, but Shion warns him that he still lost a ton of blood and needs to chill. The monster is visibly shaking and sweating while he leans on his sword, trying to act tough by saying he'll let Shion off for today, which just makes Shion wonder if the guy is a complete idiot. Shion tells him not to go dying before they can have their real fight, then stops because he realizes he doesn't even know his name. The orc says his name is Schwain, so Shion introduces himself and shakes the monster's hand before they head their separate ways. As they walk away through the forest, a voice cuts through the quiet. The hooded girl is standing there with her arms crossed, looking totally annoyed while she asks Shion what he thinks he's doing, but he just plays it off like he was just handling some simple negotiation. He apologizes for not checking with her first, explaining that promising a rematch was the only way to get the orc to leave, but she tells him that isn't even the part she's confused about. The hooded girl is completely floored, asking Shion if he's serious about actually being able to talk to monsters. He just casually feeds a little bird while explaining his gift lets him speak to anything with a will, which she thinks is incredible. Shion brushes it off as a useless dud gift that only works for talking, mentioning how it even got him kicked out of his old party. He gives her a genuine smile, saying that even if it's a weak power, getting a compliment from her makes him happy. The girl gets all flustered and wonders if he's really this clueless, then asks him how her own voice sounded to him. Shion realizes why her voice sounded like it was doubled sometime, finally putting the pieces together about her secret, but he doesn't seem to mind, waving his hand and thanking her for saving his life twice because of it. The girl starts tearing up and blushing, overcome with emotion now that she knows he could hear her true feelings clearly. She loses all her cool and tackles Shion into a huge hug, crying out that she finally found her saviors. While the bird is just happy she smells good, Shion starts to panic from the sudden contact and how soft she feels. Lime pops up right between them and gives a casual greeting to the pair. Cassandra pulls back a bit, looking embarrassed and admitting she's pretty confused by everything. Turns out her full name is Cassandra, and people know her as the Enchanting Prophet. Shion tells her he's the one who should apologize, then introduces himself and Lime again. She mentions she's been a solo player too, still kind of amazed he can talk to beasts like that. Shion just gives her a warm look and says she has a really nice name, which makes her stare up at the sky for a second before telling him that if he's cool with it, she wants him to join her. And Shion asks if she's serious about forming a party. He's totally caught off guard, repeating the words back to her like he can't believe it. Cassandra just looks at him with this soft, blushing smile and asks if he actually wants to. Moving on, things shift back to the main guild headquarters. Angelina looks over the items Shion brought back and notes how the orc tribe is getting restless with their new leader. She asks about that gifted orc he mentioned while checking the day's harvest, and thanks him for the delivery, saying this info is exactly what they need to finish the plan for the big hunt. Shion repeats the words back to her, and Angelina mentions the guild will be making an official announcement about it pretty soon. She adds that she'd be really happy if he decided to take on the request when the time finally comes. Shion starts thinking about how much has happened today and suddenly remembers those guys from earlier. He asks her if the dudes who tried to pick a fight with him this morning ever made it back to the guild. Angelina says they haven't heard a word from them yet, and while the guy's a veteran who shouldn't be doing anything stupid, she still looks a bit concerned and asks Shion if something happened out there that she should know about. Before he can even answer, she gives him a look and says no matter what happens, she's always going to be on his side. Shion starts sweating, trying to act like it was no big deal. He says they just happened to pass each other in the cave, and Angelina just stares at him for a second. She tells him she won't push the subject if that's his story, but she's clearly suspicious. Suddenly, she slams her hands down and leans in, demanding to know who that woman was that he came back with. She gets a scary look on her face and asks if he was seriously trying to hit on girls while he was supposed to be adventuring. She slumps onto the counter, sulking while she mutters about how it's totally wrong to go looking for hookups in a dungeon. Shion panics and waves his hands, telling her she's got it all wrong. He swears the woman just helped him out of a bad spot, so he tries to move the conversation along by asking if she knows anything about what kind of adventurer Cassandra actually is. Angelina pulls up the guild records and notes that she's actually pretty famous, going by the name Cassandra of Calamity in some circles. The records show she's a B-rank solo adventurer with blood-red hair who even stands out when she's diving into high-level dungeons with a party. She's known as a skilled swordswoman who uses a unique weapon from the East known as a katana. The records say Cassandra is a survivor, the only one who always makes it back alive from her missions, and Angelina admits her skills are the real deal, even though she'd never recommend actually joining a party with her. She explains that since it's just a rumor, they can't know for sure, but usually there's no smoke without fire. Shion listens, wondering if that's really the case, and thanks Angelina for all the help with the info. Shion thinks back to meeting her. He just can't see her being a bad person and figured there was more to the story, so he decides he'll just find out for himself. If he ends up getting played, he'll just blame his own bad gut feeling, but his thoughts get cut off when Angelina suddenly calls his name to get his attention. Shion jumps a bit and answers her, and then she switches gears, asking when the two of them should go grab dinner. She starts playing with her hair all nervous-like, mentioning that things at the guild are finally slowing down enough for her to take a break. Shion gets pretty flustered and asks if she's actually sure she wants to go with him, just the two of them alone. Angelina gives him a warm look and says yes, mainly because he's always taking such good care of her at the guild, so she explains that she can handle her solo stuff just fine now and figures they should go out to celebrate. Shion tells her he'll definitely be in touch soon, while internally he's absolutely losing it with excitement. He starts wondering if his luck is finally changing, thinking it's crazy that a girl actually wants to grab dinner with him. It's a huge shift from his time with the Argonauts, where every girl was only interested in Jason. But then he tries to stay grounded, reminding himself that Angelina is just a nice person and this is probably just professional, and his train of thought gets interrupted when Cassandra finally shows up, asking if she kept him waiting. She tells him it's no big deal since she actually likes seeing the guilds in new towns to get a feel for how strong the local adventurers are. As they sit together, she catches him smiling and asks why he's grinning like a crazy person and if something good happened. Shion gets all flustered and tries to deny it, insisting he isn't grinning at all and that he's actually known for being the cool, serious type. Shion points at the menu and lets her know the herb pork sauté is definitely the way to go. So Cassandra gives him a big smile and says she'll take his word for it since she's really looking forward to the food. Shion notices she's in a great mood and asks if this is her favorite dish, but she tells him she's just happy because it's been forever since she ate with someone else. She starts blushing and looks down, wondering if she's just getting a bit too carried away with the moment. Looking back up at him with a shy expression, she asks if he thinks it's weird that she's this excited. Shion just laughs and tells her today is his treat, so she should feel free to order whatever she wants. After they finish eating, Shion stands up and suggests it's time to talk about officially forming a party, asking her to follow him. He holds the door open for her as they head somewhere a bit more private to talk business. Once they settle in, Shion pulls out his card and says they should start by swapping guild cards, then asks if she has a problem with that. Cassandra reaches for her card and says it's actually the best idea since it saves her from having to explain her situation out loud. Shion looks at the card and his jaw drops. It's packed with rare high-level skills he's never even heard of. He tries to read the gift description, but some of it is totally blocked out, and he realizes she's actually a half-breed. Cassandra tells him there are two things she needs to get off her chest. She touches her hair and admits that, as he can probably tell, she isn't exactly 100% human. Looking away a bit sadly, she tells him she's a half-breed with demon blood. Shion is completely floored and asks if she's really talking about a demon. He needs to be sure, so he asks if she means those demons from the legends. He starts thinking about the demon race entities that are famous for having power that's basically off the charts. The stories say they're actually descendants of gods who got kicked out of power after losing a huge war to take over the world. Hardly anyone has actually seen one in modern times, but because they're so insanely strong, everyone knows the legends about them. Shion mentions that they definitely exist, but they usually live like total hermits. Cassandra admits that even though it's her bloodline, she's never actually met one in person either. It finally sinks in for him that legendary god-tier blood is actually flowing through her veins right now. Shion rubs his chin, trying to wrap his head around her being a half-demon, and she just quietly confirms that he's right. Cassandra takes it all in and realizes Shion has the perfect set of skills for a forward plus. Having that gift of foresight makes things way easier once the fighting actually starts. Shion can't help but notice how beautiful she is, thinking he'd be the luckiest guy alive to have her on his team. Cassandra brings up her gifts again, explaining that her power, the enchanting prophet, actually does two different things. Her eyes glow as she explains she can shave off a few seconds of the immediate future, but she can also see way ahead like an actual oracle. Shion tells her that sounds like the most useful power ever, and while she agrees it has no weaknesses, she admits there's one huge catch. Shion just stands there totally stunned by what she's about to say next. She explains that her powers are the only reason she's alive, but the problem is that whenever she sees the future, everyone else completely misinterprets it. Hearing this hits Shion hard. It sounds exactly like the kind of stuff he went through with his old party, and Cassandra explains that even if she warns people a giant tsunami is coming, they'll just look at her and say it's a nice, peaceful day. Cassandra looks pretty down, thinking about how her gift is actually kind of a curse since nobody ever understands what she's trying to say, but Shion realizes his translation skill is actually picking up her true voice, which explains the weird echoes he's been hearing this whole time. Cassandra gets excited, realizing that since Shion is the only person alive who can hear her prophecies properly, he's basically the savior she's been waiting for, and she looks at him with total hope in her eyes. She circles back to their earlier talk about joining forces, admitting that while her gift usually gets her judged, her physical combat skills are legit, and they'd make a great team. She's so desperate to join him that she offers to let him pick all the quests and even keep 90% of the money. But Shion tells her he only has one real condition for them to become a party. Cassandra gets a bit nervous and offers to dye her hair if it's a problem for him, though Shion immediately shuts that down, telling her he thinks her hair is beautiful and looked like flames when she saved him. Cassandra's face goes totally red, and she asks Shion if he actually likes her, looking completely stunned that he'd say such a thing about her hair. She looks away, feeling insecure and asking if the color isn't just creepy, since it looks way too different to belong to a normal human. She says the color is just proof that she isn't a pure person, but Shion just shrugs it off and asks why it matters, saying if something is pretty, then it's just pretty. Shion points to himself and reminds her that he's literally the kind of guy who hangs out and parties with slimes, telling her he doesn't care at all about her being half-demon or anything like that. Because of his translation gift, he knows for a fact there are plenty of good monsters out there, so he figures the only thing that actually matters is what kind of person someone is on the inside, which makes Cassandra worry even more, asking if that doesn't just make things worse, especially since he definitely heard that awful nickname people gave her. Shion repeats the name Disaster to himself, but he looks her right in the eye and says he knows the real truth, realizing that while everyone else misunderstood her because of her gift, she was the only one who actually looked out for him and gave him advice, even remembering how she went out of her way to fight off a giant pig demon just to keep him safe. Shion talks about how much he respects that they chose to be honest with him, even knowing it was a bad move. Then he looks her right in the eyes with a huge smile and tells her he trusts her, leaving Cassandra just whispering his name. He gets all worked up and leans in, telling her that honestly she's just a really good person, and Cassandra just stands there stunned, thinking back to how she used her gift to share prophecies with everyone. Shion admits he cares way more about helping people than fixing his own reputation, looking like a total hero to her. She turns away blushing and calls him an idiot for being so nice, but she still gives him a quiet thanks. Moving on, she gets back to business and asks Shion what kind of deal he wants for them to work together. Shin tells her he's no savior, and that if they're going to be a real party, they have to be equal. So he wants to split all the rewards right down the middle and pick their quests as a team, because he thinks it's important to be able to call each other out on mistakes and have trust that goes both ways. Shin looks down with a calm smile and admits that he can't be the savior, but he tells Cassandra he really wants to be her partner, and she asks him if he's sure, wondering if that's really okay. Shin looks away and tells her that's actually what matters most to him. He laughs a bit awkwardly, admitting he's the weaker one here, but he's good at chores and stuff, so Cassandra leans over the railing, telling him she'll just train him herself since they're partners, making Shin ask if she's actually cool with that. She starts walking off, warning him to be ready because her training is brutal. She looks back with a pretty intense smile and tells him that even if he cries and begs, she won't let him go. The night passes, and by the next day the two of them head back to the guild, where Angelina shows up with a scary smile, asking if they're forming a party and if her advice meant nothing. She just waves it off, saying it's fine because they're just an adventurer and a guild worker anyway. Angelina looks pretty annoyed, asking Shin if he even cares about the advice she gave him earlier, since Shin realizes he was warned about her. But he knows he has to explain that the rumors are just a big misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Cassandra wonders why the guild worker is looking at him like he's trash. Checking her clipboard, Angelina tells Cassandra that since she's B rank and the womanizer Shin is only C rank, they'll have to take a special request that works as a certification exam, and Shin just stands there completely shocked, realizing she's treating him even worse than before. Angelina continues, saying she knows they're both experienced, but Cassandra can't just fight alone as the higher-ranking member. She explains that if they manage to finish the job safely, the party will officially be ranked as B rank. Cassandra is all fired up, telling Shin it's their first real mission together and they should give it their all, while Shin just looks totally drained and weakly agrees. Angelina stops them though, saying she's just asking because she's curious, but she wants to know how they actually teamed up, and she asks Cassandra if Shin hit on her aggressively to get her to join, especially since she turned down Angelina's own offer before. Shin absolutely loses it, wondering what the hell she's even talking about while trying to explain there's a real reason for everything. Angelina realizes Shin's original plan was to just go solo, but Cassandra is practically begging him to team up. She's even saying she'll do absolutely anything if he just lets her join him, which makes things look way worse for Shin. Cassandra tries to take the blame by saying she's the one who pushed for the party, but Angelina is just disgusted. She can't believe Shin has this girl saying she'll do anything for him. Cassandra doesn't see the problem though, happily telling the guild staff that Shin isn't trash or a bad guy at all. She keeps digging the hole deeper, mentioning how Shin complimented her hair and called it beautiful just last night. Shin starts losing it, frantically telling her to be careful with how she words things before Cassandra adds that a trash guy wouldn't be that nice. Angelina just zeroes in on the last night part, getting even more judgmental about how they got so close on the very first day they met. She makes a sharp comment about how Shin sure knows his way around women. It's clear she's not buying his innocent act. She even brings up his old party, the Golden Fleece, mentioning how he was supposedly getting pretty cozy with a Sue back then too. Angelina finally hits her limit and tells him to just shut up, acting like his trashy behavior is literally contagious and she doesn't want any part of it. Shin is stressed out of his mind trying to explain that there's a reason for everything, like why he even has his hair tied up. But Cassandra starts getting emotional, asking if he was lying last night, and if he actually hates her hair. Shin has to desperately swear that he was being for real and truly thinks her hair is beautiful. Angelina is totally over the drama, telling them to go make out somewhere else because she's actually got work to do. And as she confirms she's officially accepted their request, Shin starts booking it out of there, yelling for Cassandra to follow him. Angelina reaches out toward him. Just for a second, she looks like she's going to miss having him around, so she calls out one last time, telling him to make sure he comes back home safely. Shin just flashes a big grin and gives her a thumbs up. He's totally confident he'll be back in one piece. Moving on, the B-rank quest officially kicks off. The two of them head deep into the forest to start their troll hunt, which has Shin feeling pretty fired up. He tells Cassandra it's time to get moving and she's right there with him. Cassandra gives him a thumbs up, telling him that if he just uses the technique she taught him, this whole thing will be a piece of cake. Shin says he'll definitely give it his all, but she starts overthinking things, mentioning how they need to find the target first since scouting is usually the hardest part of the job. Shin just looks at her confused, telling her they've already finished the scouting part. He's way ahead of her on this one. Shin talks to a small bird and translates for Cassandra, saying 3 creatures in the forest will guide them to the right spot. Cassandra looks totally impressed, telling him she really thinks his translation ability is super convenient, so Shin explains that just talking isn't enough to make friends, but thanks to his skill, he's got plenty of monster allies back at his base. Cassandra realizes he probably talked to the slimes and bats in the cave, asking if he uses them to find where monsters are hiding. Shin starts moving through the thick forest, navigating the rough terrain, and it doesn't take long before he spots something worth picking up. He shows off a handful of grapes and rare herbs, and Cassandra can't believe he found such high-quality materials just like that. She wonders why any party would fire someone with his talents, then gives him a look and asks if he got kicked out for hitting on all the girls. Shion completely loses it and starts waving his hands around, yelling that he got fired because he's weak and she saw his low stats herself. He looks away, explaining that those girls were just his old childhood friends in Medea, and he's always been told his work is just half-hearted. Cassandra tells Shion they should move past the talk about girls and focus. She explains he's got it wrong because everyone has a job to do in a party, and it's all about positioning. Like how frontline fighters stay close while magic users hit from the back. So she points out that even if he thinks his skills are basic, being intermediate in everything makes him the perfect support. Shion's impressed she knows so much for a solo player, and she just blushes while admitting she studied up for a moment like this. She looks down for a second, feeling the weight of the moment. She says this feels like a huge responsibility. Shion doesn't let the mood stay heavy and gets pumped up, yelling that they're going to make this the best party ever. He checks with the bird and says the target is close, while Cassandra just smiles and says she's itching to get started when a massive troll blocks their path. These things are the ultimate test for C-rankers and way stronger than any orc. But strength isn't even the worst part, since their crazy healing ability is what makes them a total nightmare to fight. Any hit that isn't a finishing move just heals up instantly, making it impossible to take them down with weak attacks. Shion thinks back to his time with the Golden Fleece. They could only kill a troll by landing one massive, fatal blow, and even then it took Medea's strongest magic just to barely get the job done. Looking down at the monsters in the woods, he realizes his new party doesn't have any crazy high-level spells to rely on, so their only real chance is to count on Cassandra's insane sword skills and that sharp blade of hers. He watches from the ledge, trying to figure out how to buy her enough time to actually kill one. When he asks her how long she needs, she just casually says 5 seconds, leaving Shion standing there with his head spinning. He can't even wrap his mind around that kind of speed, but Cassandra's already moving on to the plan. She tells him she'll drop 2 of them instantly and leave the last one for him. Shion starts to think this might actually work until it hits him. He gets a little nervous and asks if she's really suggesting he take one on all by himself. Cassandra just gives him a confident look and says he'll be fine. She even promises to back him up if things get ugly, and right before she makes her move, she tells him she truly believes in him. She shouts that she'll see him later and turns into a total blur, zipping through the trees and smashing into the ground right in front of the trolls. Shion hears her words and figures if she's that confident, he might as well go for it. Cassandra's sword takes off a troll's head before it even knows she's there. She doesn't stop for a second, holding out her hand and yelling for the flames to blast the next one. After slicing through its legs mid-dash, she slides across the dirt and screams Shion's name to signal it's time. The second troll is completely blinded by the fire magic she left behind, giving Shion the opening he needs. He stands right in front of the remaining giant and shouts that its opponent is right here. The monster growls, focusing all its rage on the small human standing in its way, and Shion just stares it down, gritting his teeth and telling the beast to bring it on. The troll loses its mind and raises its massive club for a killing blow, but Shion reminds himself that his partner actually believes in him. He just has to focus and make this work. Shion slides right under the monster's legs to find an opening, and Cassandra yells out that this is the moment they've been waiting for. Shion thinks it's over, but Cassandra shouts that the thing is still alive, and he barely has time to react as a massive fist swings past his head. She notices the beast is finally slowing down and tells Shion to keep pushing the attack. Shion shouts that he's on it, charging straight back into the fight with everything he's got left. He lands a heavy strike that leaves the troll screaming in pain as smoke pours out of the fresh wound, and the monster tries to grab him one last time, but Shion yells that he won't let it happen while his sword starts glowing with energy. With a loud roar, he drives the blade deep into the monster's chest. The troll can't even scream as the blow connects clean. Shion stands there breathing hard, watching the smoke rise from the massive body as it finally stays down. He leans on his sword, barely able to believe he actually won, while Cassandra comes running over with her arms in the air cheering for him. She tells him he's officially ready for the real world, laughing and saying he's way better than she ever expected. Shion laughs and admits he's actually pretty surprised by his own growth, but tells Cassandra it's only because she's been such a great teacher. The two of them share a solid fist bump to celebrate the win. Moving on to the city, they head straight for the massive towers of the Adventurers Guild. Back at the counter, Yumi gives them a big smile and lets them know the appraisal on that troll's magic stone is finally finished. She officially congratulates Shion on hitting B rank and mentions that even though Angelina is in a meeting, she's going to be so happy. Shion says he really hopes that's the case since he feels like he's been in her debt for a long time now. Yumi just laughs and tells him he's being way too humble. And then she lets them in on some news, mentioning she's been assigned to coordinate a massive new project starting up, explaining that the main reason for the project was the specific info they got from the adventurer on the job. Shion tries to say something, but Cassandra cuts him off, joking that if he's B rank, the guild must be really short on people lately. Shion stops in his tracks when he spots a familiar face. It's Jason standing right there with Medea, and Jason greets Medea before turning his smug look toward Shion, joking that he expected the guy to come crawling back to the order in tears. But instead, he shows up with a girl, which Jason mocks as a pretty smooth move. Cassandra calls him a rude bastard and asks Shion if he actually knows this dude, so Shion explains that Jason is the leader of his old crew, the Golden Fleece. Jason doesn't miss a beat and shouts out that he's the one and only great hero, but Cassandra isn't impressed at all, telling him he's a joke of a hero and that anyone who can't see Shion's value is just a complete idiot. Jason absolutely loses it and starts screaming, asking what she just said before threatening to kill her right there, while Medea desperately tries to hold him back. He keeps yelling about how there's no way he'd lose to some woman, but Cassandra just keeps walking and reminds him that B ranks aren't allowed to start private fights under guild rules. Suddenly Jason stops and points out her red hair, finally realizing she's actually Cassandra the Calamity, the famous B rank solo adventurer. And he looks pretty annoyed as he spits out that dealing with a comrade killer is going to be a massive pain in the neck. The comment clearly hits a nerve, leaving Cassandra looking shaken as she quietly whispers to herself that she didn't actually do any of those things. Medea looks up at Jason in shock, asking him what he just said, while Jason yells at Shion to find out what he thinks he's doing, but Shion isn't backing down and tells Jason he needs to apologize to Cassandra. Shion says he doesn't care if Jason makes fun of him, which leaves Medea looking pretty confused, but then he starts yelling that he won't let anyone insult his partner and demands an apology right now. Jason yells back that everyone calls Shion a loser and there's no denying the truth, but Shion gets right in his face and shouts that he's completely wrong about that. Shion keeps going, shouting at the top of his lungs that the fact he's even standing there alive is proof enough that Jason's wrong. Jason just clicks his tongue and says Shion finally noticed how things are, so Medea steps in to say the arguing is pointless and suggests they just settle things with a mock battle. Shion doesn't hesitate and says he'll take them on, but Cassandra immediately calls out for him to wait. Cassandra tells him to let her handle this one, and as Shion looks at her, he realizes that despite her reputation, she really is a master when it comes to swordsmanship. She tells him that's all the more reason for her to step up, especially since this whole mess is a matter of both of their reputations now. Jason just starts laughing at them, mocking Shion for letting a woman cover for him and joking that the guy must be living the high life. Cassandra points a finger straight at Jason and tells him to keep barking while he still can, because she's taking Shion's place in this mock battle. Cassandra places her hand on Shion's chest to hold him back, and he finally gets what she's trying to do as he realizes her plan. Jason starts yelling to the crowd that he's worth way more than Cassandra could ever be, asking everyone if they're ready to see him go to work. Cassandra just looks over at him, completely unfazed by the noise, and asks if he's actually ready to start this. The crowd starts going wild, cheering for Jason and telling the outsiders they can go straight to hell, while Yumi watches from the side feeling pretty worried about how this is going to go. People in the stands are getting even more aggressive, with one guy shouting for Jason to break the red-haired girl's nose for him. Jason gets this creepy look on his face and starts wiggling his finger, telling Cassandra that he already knows exactly what her special gift is. He puts his sword over his shoulder and tries to act like a big shot, telling her that since he's a gentleman, he'll let her take the first shot at him. Cassandra doesn't miss a beat and tells him she'll gladly take that offer. Immediately activating her Flamberge Flame leg skill, she moves so fast that fire trails behind her. And before Jason can even react, his smug face turns into a mask of pure terror. She delivers a massive hit that sends a shockwave through the arena, leaving Cassandra standing calm while the power of her strike speaks for itself. Jason is face down in the middle of the wrecked arena floor, completely out cold as Yumi screams his name, and the crowd just stares in total shock. Smoke is still pouring out of the hole in the wall where Jason landed, but Cassandra just stands there like it was nothing. Meanwhile, Shion is jumping for joy. The crowd is losing it, with some people yelling about how crazy strong Cassandra is while others just can't believe what they're seeing, and she just smiles at the win. Angelina comes running into the area looking totally frantic, demanding to know why there's such a huge mess and so much noise going on. She stops dead in her tracks when she sees the destruction. Shion looks over and is pretty surprised to see her showing up right then. Yumi is basically clinging to Angelina and crying her eyes out. Angelina ignores the drama for a second and tells Shion he needs to explain himself. She says she gets the gist of the fight, but she's actually got something way more important to talk about, then asks Shion to follow her. Angelina leads them away from the arena, telling them to come this way while Shion follows behind feeling pretty tense about the whole thing. They end up in a quiet library area where Angelina sits them down. She looks them both in the eye and tells them they need to stay calm for this. She explains that another group of adventurers went to that same cave they were just in, and then drops the news that everyone but one guy got wiped out. The few survivors from the cave are in bad shape. One guy is just lying there covered in bandages, having been completely wrecked by a pig demon. He managed to pass on a message before passing out at the clinic, and between that and what Shion told them, the guild is piecing it all together. Shion looks pretty stressed as he hears that the guild is about to call for an official emergency mission, meaning things are about to get real. Cassandra mentions they're doing one last check before the order goes out, while Angelina asks Shion to tell her exactly what went down in that cave. Shion looks over at Cassandra and agrees to tell them everything he saw. He knows how high the stakes are now. An emergency mission is a whole different beast compared to the normal jobs adventurers usually pick off the board. It's a direct order. While people usually choose their own quests, the guild handpicks specific adventurers for emergencies, and high rankers aren't allowed to turn them down. Shion realizes the town is actually in a massive crisis if they're resorting to forced missions like this. He can feel the tension in the air. After he finishes explaining the whole situation using a map, Angelina thanks him for being so thorough with the details. She gets a serious look on her face and points out that aside from the guy the two of them met, there's a much bigger problem. Angelina explains that it's best to assume there are enemies with special gifts that can buff their whole group, making them even more dangerous than usual. Shion looks pretty worried as the realization hits, asking if she's actually talking about an Orc King. Cassandra asks Shion if he's heard of it, and he says he remembers reading about the creature in some old guild records from decades ago. An army led by an Orc King once marched out of a cave toward the city, and even with small numbers they wrecked everything. The guild had to send every A rank they had to stop them, but they still lost 2 towns and a lot of lives. Cassandra points out that if even A rank struggled back then, it looks like history might be repeating itself right now. Angelina doesn't think this one is quite as strong as the old Orc King, but it's still a huge threat they need to crush before the enemy forces grow. Shion doesn't hesitate for a second and tells Angelina that he and his party want to help out. He thinks it's a good move, and Cassandra agrees, saying it's the perfect first mission for them now that they're B ranks. Angelina breathes a sigh of relief and thanks them for stepping up, then says they should go over the plan before the news goes public. A few days pass after the talk about the Orc King, and things seem to be moving back at the guild. As Shion and Cassandra walk through the main hall, people start pointing and whispering about how Cassandra apparently took down Jason. Shion mentions she's getting a ton of attention, but she just corrects him saying it's both of them before asking if they should get moving to find Angelina. She's right there waiting for them with a big smile, giving them a friendly morning greeting as she gets down to business. She tells them the guild officially requested they handle an emergency mission, and Shion doesn't even hesitate to say they're in since he considers the place a second home. Cassandra agrees too, saying she doesn't really have any reason to say no, especially since there's a special bounty for taking out monsters with gifts. She looks ready to go, admitting she's just itching for a good fight when someone yells out from the back of the room. The other adventurers start wondering if Shion's group is actually joining the front lines, but a loud voice asks if they're forgetting someone important. It turns out to be Jason, who shouts that his party is obviously joining the mission too. He points right at Shion and Cassandra, yelling that he's going to show them that real adventurers only matter when they work as a team, alongside his other members. Theseus and Atalante are standing right there with him, 2 C-class solo fighters who are now part of his group. Cassandra doesn't miss a beat, calling Jason a loser for making such a scene. She mockingly asks Shion if he can translate all that noise for her, which completely sets Jason off. He screams that he's going to make them eat those words later before ordering his new team to follow him to the strategy meeting, determined to snag all the rewards for himself. As they head toward the conference room, a familiar voice calls out Shion's name. It's Castor, a C-rank guardian knight who is waving him down with her partner Pollux. Shion greets them both warmly, mentioning it's been a while and congratulating them on finally making it to C-rank. Castor smiles, explaining that the promotion is exactly why the guild reached out to them for this emergency. Shion starts getting all emotional, tearing up while acting like a proud dad and telling them how much they've grown. Pollux isn't really feeling the sentimental vibe though, grumbling that he doesn't need Shion trying to teach him anything new. He gets shut down pretty quick though, and once things settle, Castor leans in with sparkling eyes. She's dying to hear the story about the time Shion actually went head-to-head with a gift holder monster. Cassandra looks at the girl's intense energy and asks if she's even okay. Shion just laughs it off, saying she's way tougher than she looks and he's gotten used to her over the years. But his face goes serious when he actually answers, telling them honestly that the fight was almost too much to handle and if they ever see that kind of aura, they need to run. Shion tries to explain that she's just weak, but Pollux turns around with a look that would kill, calling him brother in a way that makes him yelp in total fear. Watching the two of them interact, Cassandra can't help but think that they have a really weird relationship, and Shion catches her vibe, quickly explaining that even though they seem chaotic, the two of them actually get along great. Cassandra doesn't look totally convinced, but Shion keeps going, saying Pollux is the high-energy one while Castor is the careful, thoughtful type with a sharp tongue. He thinks they just balance each other out perfectly. Cassandra looks away, admitting she's actually a little jealous because they have a connection that's impossible to just copy. Shion gives her a warm smile and suggests they should just focus on building their own kind of bond, so they decide to head into the meeting. Shion breaks down the whole plan, showing how the scouts are already out and how the advanced team will lead the main force toward the cave, though he admits he's still really worried about Lime. He tells Cassandra he's going to ask to go ahead with the advanced team so he can get a better handle on the situation. Cassandra gives him a fist bump, telling him they're definitely taking this thing down, and Shion couldn't agree more. With the plan set, the heavy supply carriages start rolling out toward the mountain. Looking at how well he gets along with the twins, Cassandra points out that Shion seems to know just about everyone, and Shion explains it all goes back to his days as a rookie instructor for the guild. Cassandra is impressed, since he handles so much more than normal adventuring. He tells her he even talks to monsters sometimes because building trust is everything, though it backfired once when another guy thought he was a monster and attacked him. Still, that reputation got him a sweet deal on a new mithril sword from a local blacksmith who really respects him. Cassandra thinks he's incredible, but Shion just says he's only here because a senior pushed him through training. When she asks if that person was an adventurer too, Shion gets a little quiet about it. Cassandra doesn't push it, instead promising to be a partner he can actually be proud of. The two of them finally make it to the main guild encampment, a huge setup right by the mountain. Pollux spots them immediately and asks if they're ready to head in, while Castor just stands there looking annoyed. Shion tries to give the twins some last-minute advice, telling them to stay sharp but not to rush, and he warns them to run if they hit any real resistance instead of trying to be heroes. Castor snaps back, telling Shion his only job is to get back alive with the intel. He starts to say he doesn't need the lecture, but gets cut off before he can finish his thought. Pollux steps in with a huge smile, politely asking Shion to stay out of their way for a bit before turning to grab her brother and get him moving. Shion thanks them for the help, and Pollux bows while telling him to take care of himself. Castor just stands there looking completely drained by the whole interaction, but then Pollux gets a bit shy, asking Shion if she can request a favor once she makes it back safely. Shion tells her he doesn't mind as long as it's something he can actually do. She gets all excited and thanks him, while Castor loses it in the background, yelling at her about the story she's trying to set up, and then the two of them take off toward the mountain. Shion watches them run and can't help but wonder if those two are actually going to be okay on their own. Cassandra chimes in, explaining that the twins are actually a level beyond normal C-rankers because of their unique skills and how well they work together. Shion sounds curious, asking about those unique skills, but then he suggests she should just ask them herself later. He figures it's time for them to head out and handle their own business too. Shion stands alone for a second, just taking a breath before they go. Shion pokes at Lime with a stick, asking if anything has changed lately. Lime starts complaining about how things have been weird, saying people are showing up in huge groups and pig devils are busy digging holes everywhere. Lime snuggles up against Cassandra, looking completely stressed out. It says it's so worried about everyone invading its home that its usually perfect skin is starting to break out. Shion tries to calm it down, mentioning that while the guild is getting ready for a big hunt, the slimes hiding in the shadows should be totally fine. But something about the story bothers Shion. He thinks to himself that pig demons aren't usually known for digging holes, and he's never heard of them being smart enough to have those kinds of habits. Cassandra looks totally overwhelmed and flustered while Lime tries to get Shion's attention. The little slime says it has something really important to tell him, while Shion just stares at Cassandra in disbelief. Meanwhile, Pollux is out in the field with her brother, pointing toward the mountain. She tells him that she actually thinks she's pretty lucky, explaining that even though goblins wrecked her village and forced her to become an adventurer, things worked out. Castor focuses on the fight, slashing through an orc while thinking back. He knows both he and his sister were born with great skills, so they never really had to worry about money, but Pollux lets out a burst of wind magic, remembering a darker time. She felt like life didn't have any meaning anymore, and it was Shion who finally gave her a reason to keep going, thinking back to when Shion showed her how to use a sword. He didn't treat her like some sad kid who lost her hometown. He just treated her like a regular adventurer, and that changed everything. Pollux thinks about how Shion's words still keep her going even now, while Castor notices she's bleeding and tells her she's hurt. She hopes she can actually be helpful to Shion during this hunt, and simply thanks her brother for looking out for her. Castor smiles, saying he understands her feelings, but he starts to say something about what happens if they make it back, reminding her they're in enemy territory and need to stay sharp. But just as Pollux starts to agree, she gets cut off by a sudden heavy noise that echoes through the area, catching both of them completely off guard as they look up and see a massive horde of angry boar demons charging out from the darkness of the cave right at them. The sheer number of monsters is overwhelming. The two of them just stand there for a second, totally frozen in shock. Pollux quickly calls on the wind to help her, but Castor realizes the danger and yells for his sister to get back. Meanwhile, Shion is frustrated because too many people are around for his bats to track anything, while Cassandra worries if they should have left the guild staff so angry. Shion tells her they couldn't just risk 2 lives like that, especially since he's still stuck thinking about those weird boar demons Lime mentioned earlier. Shion pushes forward, reminding Cassandra that she's the one who saw the danger. He says there's no point in them being a team if they don't move right now, so Cassandra thanks him, her expression softening as she suggests they apologize to the guild staff together once everyone is safe and they spot a small demon lurking nearby. Shion tells her they should try to catch the little guy alive instead of just taking it out. Cassandra agrees immediately, picking up her pace to close the distance, but when they corner it, she's just confused by how it's acting. Shion ignores the weirdness and demands to know where the people who were fighting went. He holds his blade to the creature's throat, telling it to answer him. The goblin starts sweating and making gross sounds, acting like it's completely lost its mind. Shion hears the sounds of a real struggle coming from deeper in, realizing that the reports of a battle were actually true after all. The little goblin takes that chance to run for its life, disappearing into the dark of the cave. Cassandra doesn't miss a beat, telling Shion it's time to go as she stands over a mess of blood. Shion can't even believe how fast she moved, but further in, Castor is caught in a desperate fight, using his shield to hold back a pair of those ugly pig demons charging him. Pollux rushes into the mess of monsters, yelling at the top of her lungs. The two siblings get surrounded on all sides, and Castor asks how many more of these guys they have to fight. Pollux admits the waves just won't stop coming, and Castor is already out of breath, but he tells Pollux he's going to create an opening so she can get away. Pollux isn't having any of it, snapping back at him for saying something so stupid, but before they can argue, a monster gets right in Castor's face. He tries to say something, but Pollux just screams for her brother as he barely manages to get his shield up in time. He knows he's in a bad spot. Realizing that if the fight keeps going like this, neither of them is going to make it out alive, the orc swings down hard, and Castor prepares for the worst, thinking he has to at least save his sister. Suddenly, a dark blur flashes past and rips through the monsters, leaving Castor standing there completely shocked. Shion steps out in front of them with his blade ready, asking if they're okay before telling them to leave the rest of the fight to him. Shion stands his ground and yells at the monsters, telling them to back off right now if they don't want to get wiped out. The orcs don't seem to care, just raising their weapons and growling about how they're going to kill the humans, which makes Shion realize that talking isn't going to work. He wonders if they even understand him, or if they're even acting on their own will. He looks down at his blade and realizes just how amazing this mithril really is, but he's got a better idea and kneels down to tell Pollux he's borrowing her staff for a second. She says okay, and Shion gets ready to test something new. He tells Lime to handle 2 of the monsters while he takes the lid. Lime is all over it, and Shion stares down the horde as he swings the staff and lets out a wind blade. The magic is so sharp it slices an orc right in half like it's nothing. He keeps the momentum going, calling out to the wind and letting the energy swirl around him. He drops every monster in the area while the siblings watch from behind. He looks at the staff, thinking that with this kind of power, he might actually be able to hold his own against a gift holder. Shion stands there with his eyes wide, finally putting the pieces together about who Cassandra really is. Cassandra walks up and mentions she didn't even get a chance to help him out. Shion just brushes it off, saying if that's the best those things can do, it's no big deal, but he admits the way that Orc was moving felt totally off. Cassandra agrees, saying her special gift didn't pick up a single thing from it, making Shion realize that something much worse is probably going on. He's got a really bad feeling about the whole situation. He heads over to check on Pollux, who looks completely drained as she opens her eyes and asks Shion if she's just dreaming. Shion tells her it's the real deal and hands her something to drink, telling her to get it down. She takes a sip and makes a face, saying that the gross taste is proof enough that she's definitely awake. Seeing her complain a bit makes Shion feel a lot better, knowing she's finally doing okay. Suddenly, she loses it and grabs him, panicking and asking if something happened to her brother while she was out. But her brother, Castor, is actually doing just fine. He's standing right there, totally starstruck by Cassandra and calling her a red-haired angel. Shion lets them know they only made it in time because the 2 of them held their ground so well. Pollux bows down deep, Thanking them for everything while her brother just stands there blushing. Cassandra mentions she's just happy they could get there to save them. Shion tells them they did an awesome job hanging in there, and Pollux looks up at them with a lot of respect. Shion tells her they need to head back right away and report everything to HQ. Pollux is all fired up, saying they definitely won't get tricked by the same thing next time. She starts dragging her brother away to leave, but he's still totally starstruck, staring back at Cassandra like she's an actual angel. Once they're gone, Shion suggests they check out the surrounding area. Cassandra suddenly calls out for Yuya, and right then Lime the Slime starts shaking, telling Shion there's something nearby he really needs to see. Shion follows him over to a small opening in the rock wall. He looks inside and his face just drops as he realizes what he's looking at. He doesn't waste a second and runs straight into the back of the cave, heading toward a figure slumped over on the ground. Shion yells out for Schwain, finding the orc warrior sitting there completely covered in blood and deep cuts. Cassandra points out the guy they found, and Shion's eyes go wide when he realizes it's that gift-bearer he met a while back, the orc warrior Schwain. Lime the Slime looks up at Shion, asking him if he can use his powers to heal the big guy's wounds. Shion says he can't fix everything all at once, which makes Cassandra flip out since they're supposed to be hunting these pig demons. But Lime explains that the orc was actually being jumped by a whole group of them, just like what happened to him before. Shion decides he's going to help and tells Cassandra to get ready. Just in case she tries to pull something while he's working, she can't believe it, yelling at him that the creature is literally their enemy. But Shion explains that since the wounds came from her own kind, Lime felt like they had to step in. He figures the little slime just took pity on someone going through the exact same mess he did plus. He points out that if they save her, they might actually get some useful intel on what's going on. Cassandra gives in with a sigh, admitting she doesn't have much of a choice and thinks they might actually be able to talk things out with her. Shion thanks Cassandra for coming around, and she admits she'd think anyone else was totally insane for suggesting this, but since they're partners now, she's willing to trust his call, which makes Shion rub his face and laugh, saying that hearing her say that is actually pretty embarrassing. He gets his head in the game and says it's time to get to work, so Shion focuses his energy right on the orc, telling his power to heal up the guy's wounds. The light hits Schwain's chest and starts glowing like crazy. Cassandra stares in total shock, shouting about how fast he's healing and admitting her own magic could never do anything like that. She keeps watching, mentioning she's never seen anything like it before and wondering if this is another part of Shion's gift. The orc starts to groan and finally opens his eyes, looking a bit out of it as he looks up at the two of them standing there, trying to figure out who they even are, but Lime starts jumping around right away, telling Schwain that these guys aren't bad people at all. Schwain tells Lime he has no clue what the slime is talking about, but then he looks at Shion and asks if he's the same guy who saved his life before. He turns back to the slime and gives him a quick thanks, calling him a little guy, which leads into Schwain admitting he knew Shion would show up eventually, even though it's the second time the human has had to save his skin. Shion just gives a small smile and says he definitely didn't expect them to run into each other like this again. But the orc's warrior spirit kicks in fast. He points at Cassandra and asks if she's with Shion, demanding they start their rematch right now. Schwain stops himself though, saying he can't stand the idea of fighting to the death while he still owes a debt, so he tells Shion to ask for anything as repayment. He insists that once the debt is settled, Shion has to keep his promise for a real fight, leaving Shion wondering why this guy is so obsessed with fighting Cassandra. Cassandra asks what the deal is, so Shion explains that the orc wants to finish their last battle but isn't really in the mood to push it this second. She looks a bit annoyed and asks if Shion can actually get any useful info out of the guy, and Shion says he's going to give it his best shot. Shion takes a seat and gets straight to the point, asking Schwain why the other orcs were trying to take him out in the first place. Schwain takes a second to think about how to explain everything. According to him, their leader found out that he killed his own people and let Shion's group escape, and they were already being targeted for a purge because they didn't support the surface invasion anyway. Shion feels a bit guilty about it and apologizes for getting the orc caught up in such a mess, but Schwain tells him to forget about it. He made his own choices and it's not Shion's concern at all. He actually looks kind of happy about the whole thing, saying he even got the chance to take out the strongest members of his own kind. Shion asks if he's really not holding a grudge after his own friends turned on him, but Schwain says the constant attacks just helped him level up and get stronger. He gives a straight-up no to the idea of being bitter about the betrayal, standing tall while admitting he was just doing what he wanted so he could find strong guys to fight, though he catches himself and says that's not entirely true. The orc grins and says all he really cares about is a good fight, so he offers to help Shion's group take on the big boss. But then he mentions he can't stand how Shion's brother handles things, which leaves Shion totally confused about where this talk of a brother is coming from. Shion is completely thrown off and asks if the leader is really his brother, also remembering that Schwain mentioned some kind of special power, but the orc just starts laughing, pointing at him and saying he's pretty smart just like his brother. Schwain gets right in his face, telling him that if you look closely, he's even got the same twisted look, which really hits Shion hard since it turns out the brother has a power just like his, where he can give absolute orders to anyone he's already beaten. Even though the brother is physically the weakest one there, he's got the brains to make up for it, and that's how he ended up leading the whole tribe. Schwain mentions that the brother even bragged about letting someone escape on purpose just to lure the humans in, though the orc admits he didn't really get the invasion plan himself. Shion's eyes go wide as he asks Schwain to repeat that, realizing the situation is way worse than he thought. He starts to panic, wondering if the entire group just fell straight into a trap set by the orcs. The guild clearly has no idea they're dealing with such a smart leader, and Cassandra realizes that the entire assault mission is about to go south fast. Shion keeps it real and tells Schwain they're going to fight his brother, and they might even have to kill him right there, so he asks if the orc is truly okay with that. Schwain looks pretty cold as he says he's got no reason to protect his brother's secrets anymore, basically giving Shion the green light to do what he has to, because for orcs, power is the only thing that actually matters. Shion just nods and says he understands the deal. Shion starts moving fast, calling out to Cassandra and Lime that they need to get going right now since everyone is in serious trouble. As they start running, Cassandra asks if he actually got any useful info. Shion tells her the leader is the absolute worst kind of person, but they'll have to talk while they move because time is running out. Meanwhile, in a different part of the caves, Jason and the Golden Fleece Knights have already pushed deep inside after taking the guild's job. They're currently making a move toward the spot where they think the main orc force is hiding out. Jason is already losing his cool, yelling about how long it's taking to get there. He's stressed that if they keep dragging their feet, someone else is going to beat them to it. Adelante tells him to relax since they can't just be reckless when they have no idea where the attack is coming from, though she's clearly just as frustrated. Jason points up at the ceiling and tells her to just ask a bat for direction. He starts talking trash, asking if she's even a real hunter if she can't use animals. She snaps back that she can't just talk to random bats, maybe if it was a pet she'd had since she was a kid, but this is just ridiculous. Jason is starting to regret things, thinking that if Shion was still around, they wouldn't be dealing with this disaster. Medea just tells him to stay cool. But Jason can't stop thinking about how he's the one who wanted to kick Shion out to begin with. Medea reminds him that he was the one who said the guy was useless, so Jason snaps at her, asking if she's actually trying to blame him for everything. He tries to justify it by saying if Shion had been more reliable, they never would have had to banish him. He's getting worked up, thinking about how his group is supposed to be the best of B rank. He tells the girls they need to prove themselves here so they can finally move up to A rank. Jason says he won't lose to anyone, especially not Shion. He knows they're behind on info right now, but he's confident they've got the most muscle, and he views himself as the ultimate hero of the story. Then there's Atalanta, the swift-footed hunter. She might only be C rank, but she's still a huge part of the team along with Medea, their great mage who's packing some serious magical power. Rounding out the group is Theseus, the beast killer paladin who just climbed her way up to B rank. Jason points out they have 4 heavy hitters with combat gifts. He knows Shion is working with that demon woman Cassandra now, but he's still acting like it's nothing. Theseus is feeling pretty confident. She says there's no way she'd lose if they just go at it head-on. Jason shows up to the massive fortress under siege and asks what the situation is, just as an archer spots him and calls out his name. Medea points out they're having a hard time taking the stronghold. The archer guy adds that even though some squads made it inside, they're still stuck. And suddenly this massive orc boss slams down into the middle of the fight. Someone asks if this is the guy. Jason just grins, saying a hero needs a trial by fire. He thought they were late to the party, but now he's sure fate is on his side. He tells his team they're going to take this monster down and celebrate a fresh start for the Golden Fleece. Jason yells for everyone to listen up, telling the other fighters to back off and leave the rest of the battlefield to his group. Meanwhile, Shion, Cassandra, and Schwain are rushing toward the action. Shion mentions how the current chieftain was actually replaced by the brother of the orc they're with, and Cassandra tells Schwain he's pretty thin for an orc, which usually means he's the smart one. Shion then asks what his brother was actually like. Schwain looks back on it, explaining that his brother had a weak body. Because of that, the rest of the tribe never treated him right. Schwain continues his story, explaining that one day while he was away, his brother was sent out to hunt with a different group of orcs, and he isn't entirely sure what happened out there in the woods. But suddenly, the orcs who went with his brother started following his orders, and he eventually just made them do all the hunting for him. So Shion asks if that was the moment the brother's special gift finally woke up. And Lime thinks that's exactly what happened. Schwain says his brother used to be a nice guy, but he became more violent as he gathered more followers and his ego grew. And it turns out his power actually lets him force anyone he defeats in battle to obey his every command. It didn't take long for him to get so powerful that he even took control of the tribe's previous chieftain, but his ambition didn't stop with the tribe. He eventually started talking about ruling over the entire surface world. Schwain says he tried to stop him because he knew the world was too big, but Shion realizes that's why the two brothers fought, leading to Schwain being exiled. He tells Shion not to look so down about it, and Lime adds that it's the only reason they were able to meet up again. Schwain actually sounds pretty positive, saying he's glad he gets to fight the former chief to the death with everything he's got. It's like it hasn't been all bad for him, and Shion and Lime are smiling along, but Cassandra cuts the mood and tells them to wait. She explains that the guild still thinks the chief is the strongest orc out there, so even if they wipe out the current forces, it would be bad if the orcs invaded again while they weren't looking. Shion agrees, and Schwain says they definitely have to take out the true chief. Meanwhile, the massive orc army is just swarming the battlefield in a huge chaotic mess. It's total war out there as Jason is losing his cool, yelling about why they can't break through these small fry enemies since they brought extra people just for this mission. Medea screams out for him as arrows fly everywhere, and Jason just yells back that he's already on it, but he has to bark at Theseus to stay out of the line of fire. She tries to explain that it's easier said than done, while Atalante gets caught in the chaos and lets out a cry as the attacks keep coming, and then Jason starts swearing because everything is falling apart. He tells Theseus to just focus on healing while she screams in the middle of the carnage. Jason is starting to lose it. He's sweating and thinking about how slow everyone is at reading the situation. It's getting so bad that he actually thinks Shion would have done a better job than this, and he swings his sword at the next wave. He's completely fed up with how these orcs just keep coming one after another like there's no end to them. Medea calls out to him while she's getting her magic ready, and Jason just yells back for her to go for it. He's ready for whatever she's about to drop. She lets out a massive blast that rips right through the battlefield, clearing a huge path through the orcs in a single shot. Jason tells her she did a great job, but there's no time to relax. He tells the team they're charging in right now to take advantage of the opening, so Theseus tries to say she hasn't fully recovered yet, but Jason isn't having it. He just barks at her to get back in the fight and provide backup the second she's healed up, leaving the group to rush toward the entrance of the next area. Jason leads the way, shouting for them to move, and Medea follows right on his heels. He finds some of the other guys and asks if they're still breathing. He tells them he's got their backs and the soldiers look like they've seen a ghost. They're just glad he finally showed up. But the relief doesn't last long, because right in front of them is a massive orc warrior standing over a pile of bodies, looking like a total nightmare. Jason tells the soldiers to focus on keeping the media safe. He asks if they were the ones responsible for the ground shaking, and tells them he's counting on them to stay sharp. Jason stares down the massive enemy, sweating as he asks himself if this guy is actually the boss of the whole area, and Schwain just stands there looking like a complete monster, holding a giant broken sword that's seen way too much blood. Jason tells himself he's going to take this guy down no matter what. He's got his mind set on finally becoming a hero, so he jumps right into the thick of it, dodging a massive swing by a hair and trying to find an opening to strike back. One of the guys watching from the sidelines can't believe it. He says it's insane that Jason is taking on that giant thing all alone. Jason yells out to the group that he's making his move and they better be ready to follow up, and someone quickly shouts back that they're on it. He catches a heavy blow on his blade, but the force is almost too much. Jason realizes this orc is way stronger than he ever expected. The pressure is starting to get to him, and he knows if he keeps this up, he's going to get completely overwhelmed, but something feels off about the way this guy fights. Jason wonders if a meathead like this could really be the one leading all these orcs, and he has to stop himself from thinking about Shion. He grits his teeth, telling himself to quit wondering how things would go if Shion were actually here. Jason puts on a confident face, gripping his weapon tight. He looks right at the enemy and says that either way this ends now. The whole crew moves in together, diving down from above for a massive synchronized strike, aiming everything they've got right at Schwain. The impact is huge, kicking up a giant cloud of dust and light that covers the entire area. As the smoke hangs in the air, Jason yells out, asking if he finally got him, but the others behind him look just as nervous. Jason sees something through the haze and loses it. Schwain is still standing there, holding up a charred body he used to take the hit. Jason is completely disgusted, asking if that guy really just used one of his own henchmen as a shield to save himself. And he shouts in pure frustration as he realizes his best shot didn't even leave a scratch. But he doesn't have time to vent because a massive shadow suddenly shows up right over him. Jason barely has time to react before a huge force comes swinging his way, so Schwain lets out a grunt and swings his broken blade in a wide arc. The power behind it is insane, cutting through everything in one go. Medea just stands there shaking, her face pale as she starts to break down. She's so scared she can't even get words out. Jason lunges forward with everything he's got, screaming for his attack to land in time while a blade flashes through the air. It catches him right in the chest, blood spraying as he takes a massive hit. Medea just stands there frozen, watching the whole thing happen in slow motion. She's too stunned to move, leaving her screaming Jason's name as he collapses to his knees, blood dripping onto the cold ground. Jason sits there broken and covered in his own blood, just wondering how his life ended up like this. But Medea keeps calling for him while he spirals, thinking about how he was supposed to be some legend but got wrecked by orcs. The massive orc Schwain stands over them as Jason realizes their entire front line has finally collapsed, and he looks up with what's left of his strength, telling Medea she needs to get out of there and save herself. Schwain raises a giant slab of stone to finish them both off, and Jason just watches it happen, wondering why it's ending like this. But Shion suddenly jumps in and blocks the strike, yelling at Jason and asking what the hell he's even doing there. Shion cuts right through an orc blocking his path, not slowing down for a second as he, Cassandra, and Lime sprint across the battlefield to get to the others before it's too late. Shion asks if that huge tremor was from Medea's magic, and Cassandra tells him they're close and need to hurry, then points the way. They see a bright flash up ahead and wonder if it's the way out, so they decide to just charge straight into the light. Shion makes it through but loses it when he sees Jason slumped on the ground, blood everywhere. Medea is right there holding him, completely panicking while she screams for Jason to wake up, but Shion doesn't have time to wait. He prays he can make it in time and lunges at the giant orc, telling the freak to eat his blade. Schwain manages to get his massive stone sword up just in time to block the hit, looking actually surprised that someone stopped him. Shion tells Cassandra and Lime he's counting on them to handle the backup, and they both tell him they've got it covered. So while Shion focuses on the big guy, Cassandra and Lime stand their ground against the rest of the orc army. Schwain tells Medea he's been waiting for a chance to fight her, and she admits he's actually a worthy opponent. Shion rushes over to check on Midra, asking if she's still alive while Medea just stands there in total shock. Medea recognizes Lime and asks Shion why he's even here, but the slime just says he's helping because Shion asked. Schwain loses it and screams about killing every human in sight, telling Shion to get out of his way before he dies. The rest of the orc army starts swarming the hillside, looking like they're about to overwhelm the whole area. Shion sees the reinforcements coming and gets frustrated, but then he spots something lying on the ground. He slides over and grabs the staff, telling Medea he's borrowing it to help even the odds. The staff starts draining his energy fast, but Shion pushes through and shouts for the wind to come. A massive tornado kicks up and starts ripping right through the lines of orcs, tossing them around like toys. Cassandra can't believe Shion is pulling off such huge magic, so she decides to take advantage of the chaos and jump in. Shion supports his wounded ally and shouts that the flames belong to Cassandra, realizing they're finally safe, but Jason isn't taking any chances, yelling for the media team to pull back while the fire continues to rage. Shion groans as his mana starts acting up from the spell's backfire, and the team realizes they need to treat the injured guy fast, just as Jason rushes over, asking Medea if she was the one behind the flames before freezing in total shock at seeing Shion there. Atalanta and Theseus show up right when Jason needs them most, though they immediately point out how bad things really look. Shion explains that Lime's powers managed to stop the bleeding, but now he's completely drained of all his magical energy. With the pressure mounting, Jason looks over and asks Theseus if she's actually ready to handle the fight ahead. While they catch their breath, Jason looks around at his gathered team and asks what the situation is like on the rest of the field. The word comes in that the rear is secure, meaning the main focus now is providing support from the inside. So Atalanta notes that everything depends on getting back up to the duo fighting out front, and Shion can't help but agree. Shion tells the group they have to track down the orc commander immediately because Medea asks if Shion is really the one in charge, while Jason starts to explain the situation, but Atalante can't believe there's another gift holder around. And while Medea says it's a lot to take in, Jason asks Shion if he's actually sure about this. Shion explains he got the info directly from the orc using his translator skill, though Jason still wonders if that guy can even be trusted. Shion says the way the orc is fighting is all the proof they need, while Jason looks at the dark figure and asks if that's the one. Someone calls the whole fight an eyesore as the two sides continue to clash right in the middle of the field. Schwain admits his opponent is actually really strong, showing a bit of respect while he charges up a massive heavy hit and slams it down with everything he's got. Theseus wonders if her last strike was too shallow as she watches the orc keep moving and Schwain starts to panic, wondering what kind of monster that woman is before realizing things are looking really bad for him. The orc units are totally losing it, screaming at their archers to shoot the human girl and take out the traitor along with her. In the middle of all the chaos, Shin scans the battlefield and finally spots his target, yelling out that he's found him. Shin immediately calls out for Adelante to get ready, and she gives him the green light as she moves into position. He points right at the orc holding the skull staff and asks her if she can take him down from where they are. Adelante doesn't overpromise and just says she'll try, focusing entirely as she draws back her bow and locks onto the target. She lets the arrow fly, it zips through the air and catches the orc commander completely off guard before he can react. Shin sees the hit and gets excited, asking if they manage to take him out, but Adelante is already shaking her head. The orc commander hits the dirt, bleeding and completely shocked that anyone actually had the guts to aim for him directly. Adelante looks pretty disappointed in herself and says she messed up, but Shin just smiles and tells her she did fine because the guy is definitely wounded. Shin uses the opening to rally everyone, yelling for the whole group to pile on the commander now that he's been exposed. The orc commander is totally losing his mind, screaming for his soldiers to get in front and protect him, so the human soldiers start losing it too, yelling about how they actually managed to take down a gift holder, and the rest of the orcs just stand there sweating and looking completely lost as the dust starts to clear. Shin sees the commander twitching and asks why the guy is suddenly moving again, but Cassandra is already diving in from above. She yells that she's finishing this once and for all, bringing her blade down with a massive strike that cuts right through him. She lands clean as the commander finally goes down for good, and she holds her sword high, shouting to the entire battlefield that the pig demon lord has been slain. The human soldiers catch their second wind, the older guys yell to get the rest of the pigs, while everyone else charges in to avenge their friends, absolutely wrecking the remaining orc forces as they scramble to escape. As the dust finally settles, Cassandra calls out to Shin, who turns back and asks her and the others if they have a moment to talk. The orc commander isn't dead at all. He's actually slipping away into the dark tunnels while he loses his mind over how things went south. He thought taking out the mage meant a guaranteed win, and he can't stop thinking about how Shin ignored everyone else just to come straight for his throat, figuring the guy must have some crazy powers similar to his own. Even though he's fuming, he's feeling pretty smug about the fact that he managed to swap himself with a decoy during the confusion of the battle, and he starts planning his comeback, thinking that once he gets back to the main lair he can regroup and get his revenge since his powers are still more than enough to handle a few humans. The thing that really gets to him is his brother Schwain. He calls him a total traitor and regrets not just using force to beat him into submission when he had the chance. He honestly thought his brother was the only person actually on his side, and now he's wondering if all of this was just Schwain being petty because he got exiled. He's completely disgusted that his own blood would team up with the enemy, especially after everything he let the guy get away with in the past. He finally reaches a doorway and thinks he's made a clean getaway, letting out a sigh because he made it just in time. But Cassandra is already standing there waiting for him. She tells him it's exactly what Shin predicted would happen, though Shin just shrugs and says it was mostly a lucky guess. Shin mentions it was definitely a smart move to have her check the guy's face just in case he tried something sneaky. The orc commander starts panicking, wondering how these guys even found his hiding spot. He recognizes Shin as the one who's been hunting him down and realizes catching an intelligent orc was way harder than he thought it'd be. As he looks up, he sees Cassandra and remembers she's the one who held her own against the former chief. She looks down at him and says it's finally over, but the commander is mostly stuck on how he can understand Shin's words. Shin tells him straight up that he's got no more soldiers left to hide behind. The commander realizes Shin is talking right to him and figures this weird luck is his only shot, especially when Shin says they aren't letting him run away. Thinking to himself, the commander remembers how humans can be terrifying but also way too trusting. He decides his best move is to play the victim and beg for his life. He puts on a desperate act, dropping to the ground and yelling for them to please spare him. While he's secretly plotting how he's going to kill them all later, he keeps up the act, putting his hands together and lying about how he never actually wanted to do any of this. He keeps groveling at Shin's feet, crying about how he had no other choice but to do what he did. Shin just stares at him and says the two of them might actually be alike, mentioning how he was also desperate to survive and had to do some pretty rough things to claw his way up. Shin looks down and asks if this is really just about survival for him, and then he asks if the commander can swear to stay away from the surface forever. Seeing an opening, the commander lets out a tiny, hidden grin while thinking about how easy it is to play these stupid humans. The orc commander keeps groveling, promising he's learned his lesson while secretly laughing about how naive humans are. But Shin just looks at him and says he's going to tell him one thing for his own good. The commander looks totally shocked when Shin explains that his special ability actually lets him read people's true intentions. Realizing his act is up, the orc loses it and tells Shin not to mock him, lunging forward for a final strike. But Shin is way too fast and puts him down for good before he can even land a hit. Cassandra walks over and tells Shion he did a good job, realizing that this orc really was the chieftain after he even tried using a body double to hide. And as Shion catches his breath, he admits the guy was way more clever than he thought, though he wouldn't have been a threat for much longer anyway. Cassandra notices a look on Shion's face and starts to ask what's up, right as Shion thinks about how he and the orc aren't that different, since they were both just trying to survive with whatever they had. She looks him right in the eye and asks if he's seriously thinking something like that, which catches him off guard. But then she just starts cracking up at him while he tries to stumble through an explanation, looking totally embarrassed. Cassandra gets right in Shion's face to set things straight, telling him he's nothing like that orc because that guy only saw his own people as tools to be used. And even though Shion had the power to treat her like a pawn, he chose to ask her to be his partner instead, which is the exact opposite of that orc who only ever used his special gift for his own selfish gain. So she points a finger at him and makes it clear that he uses his power to help people, meaning the two of them aren't similar at all. Shion just stands there totally quiet for a second, which makes Cassandra start to freak out a little, telling him not to just go silent because it makes the whole thing feel way too embarrassing. She tries to play it cool by turning away and rushing off, shouting that everyone else is already leaving and they need to go find the rest of their friends. And as they wrap things up, Shion walks over to Schwain and lets him know the fight is officially over on their end. Schwain takes one look at the dead chieftain and shrugs it off, noting that the guy tried a cheap sneak attack and ended up getting himself killed for it. Shion looks down as he says Schwain's name, but the orc just shrugs it off, saying they fought to the death and his big bro lost. So that's really all there is to it. He looks back on when he was just a little kid, remembering how the commander actually shared the little bit of meat he had with him, and how good it tasted back then, explaining that before the guy got all that power, he actually had a really kind heart. While Shion just stands there in total silence, Schwain admits he doesn't know how humans handle mourning their dead, so he asks Shion to take care of the rest, and Shion just quietly thanks him. They trade a solid fist bump as Schwain tells him not to forget the promise they made, and Shion promises that he'll definitely be back again, leaving Shion standing there for a second watching Cassandra as she starts walking off ahead of him. He stays there all by himself for a bit, just looking at the massive, ruined gate of the fortress. The scene shifts over to the Corinth Adventurers Guild later that night, where the place is totally lit up and buzzing with people. And inside the local tavern, the whole room is packed with adventurers who are busy eating and drinking after the long day. A huge spread of food is laid out on the tables as someone yells out for everyone to grab a drink and toast to successfully taking down the orcs. The whole tavern erupts as everyone raises their mugs for a massive toast, shouting cheers to celebrate the victory, but the noise is cut off when someone calls out Shion's name, making him and Lime look over to see who it is. A group of girls crowds around them, asking if this is the famous slime everyone's talking about and begging to pet him, leaving Shion speechless as Lime tells him he'll be right back, looking way too excited about the attention. Lime just launches himself through the air toward the girls, and they immediately start fighting over him, with one girl hugging him close and talking about how nice he feels. Shion just stares at his companion being a total pervert, especially since Lime is internally laughing about how much better girls are than guys, though it makes Shion stop and wonder for a second if the slime actually understands every word people are saying. A voice from the side suddenly teases Shion for having a huge grin on his face while he watches the chaos, and he realizes it's Cassandra, who's already busy chugging down a massive mug of beer like a pro. Shion notices Cassandra's face is bright red and asks how much she's had to drink, but she just giggles and says she isn't telling. Then she shoves a full mug toward him and tells him he needs to start drinking too, catching him totally off guard as he takes the drink, admitting that seeing her like this is a surprise since he didn't think she liked rowdy places like this. But Cassandra looks away and mentions she actually tried participating in a party like this once before. Only it didn't go great because not a single person even tried to come up and talk to her the whole time. Shion just smiles and tells her it's probably because she's so beautiful that everyone else was just too scared to approach her, making her freak out and claim there's no way that's true. While Shion just takes a sip and asks if she really believes that. He doubles down and tells her that her outfit today looks really good on her and that she looks beautiful, leaving Cassandra completely red in the face as she tells him he's just saying whatever sounds good to make her feel better. But after a second, she looks down shyly and tells him thanks for the compliment anyway. Shion and Cassandra are just hanging out by their drinks when a group of adventurers suddenly calls out to her. One guy gets right in her face and tells her that her fight with the Orc Lord was incredible, begging to hear the whole story. Cassandra looks totally overwhelmed as another guy asks if it's really true that she beat the Black Orc and made him an ally. Shion realizes these are the frontline Vanguard guys, just as they start telling Cassandra that everyone admires her strength. The crowd keeps growing, and one guy even calls her an angel, saying she looks beautiful even when she's troubled like this. which actually makes Shion feel a bit emotional, seeing how many people genuinely want to talk to her now. Cassandra can't handle the attention though, so she panics and says she has to go make her rounds before rushing off into the crowd. Once she's gone, Shion notices Angelina nearby looking pretty uncomfortable while some random dude tries to hit on her, so he shouts that he has a report for her, giving her the perfect excuse to tell the guy she's being called away for work. Angelina lets out a huge sigh of relief and thanks him for the save, but Shion just tells her it's her own fault for being so beautiful. Angelina just gives him a look and says he probably tells every girl the same exact thing. She keeps going, bringing up how he was after Cassandra and Pollux before calling him a total flirt, which leaves Shion looking pretty stunned. She laughs it off and says she's just joking, then tells him she heard how much work he actually put in, leaning in with a blush to say she's genuinely happy for him, making Shion stammer out a quick thank you. He tries to be humble by saying it's all thanks to the guild's support, while Angelina just walks off humming a happy tune to herself. Later on, Shion is sitting at a table with Cassandra and mentions that Jason hasn't shown up at the hall. Once turns out Medea said the guy recovered just fine, but he still refused to show his face at the victory party. Shion lets out a small sigh and just takes it for what it is. Angelina claps her hands to get everyone's attention and yells out that Shion is officially the MVP of the whole mission, which makes Shion totally panic as he tries to tell everyone he didn't do much, insisting they only won because of Cassandra and the team. Angelina keeps going, saying that their performance was actually pretty incredible, but she finds it wild that he managed to bring a black orc into the group, even though finding the real chieftain was all Shion's doing. She mentions how him leading a party of monsters is just like the legendary S-rank Demon King, which makes Shion tell her she's definitely overestimating him, as he nervously tries to explain that he isn't really their master or anything. He says Lime and the orcs are just helping him out, but Angelina doesn't buy it and says she isn't overestimating him at all. She gets closer and tells him straight up that she thinks he is truly amazing, explaining how she saw how hard he worked to get stronger while putting his life on the line. It's all because he noticed the real Orc Lord, and since he won without leaving any loose ends, she tells him it's totally fine for him to brag a little just for today, suggesting he should go around telling everyone he's the one who took down the boss, leaving Shion totally speechless. Just as they're talking, Yumi calls out from a distance asking Angelina for a second of her time. Angelina sighs, looking pretty bummed out that they were just getting to the good part of their conversation, so she leans in close and whispers to Shion that they should definitely go grab a meal together sometime soon. As she runs off, Shion stands there catching his breath, thinking that was way too close for comfort until Cassandra shows up waving her arms and shouting his name to get his attention. She starts pouting and asks why he didn't call out to her, calling him mean, while Shion just awkwardly explains he didn't want to get in the way. She gets a really intense look in her eyes and tells him that if it's him, it's totally fine, and insists that they should drink together. They start clinking mugs, and Shion asks what she's been talking about, noticing she's clearly had a few too many already. Cassandra blushes and looks down at her drink, mentioning that she's been talking about her hero. Shion tells her he gets that since everyone has someone they look up to, then asks for the name of the adventurer she's talking about. Pollux keeps her hero's name a secret while drinking, but she makes sure to give Shion a huge thank you for saving her life back in that cave. Shion admits that for a second there he really thought it was all over, but he's just glad he made it in time because he was seriously worried about her. She looks up at him with wide eyes, looking totally touched as she asks if he was actually worried about her, and then she just loses it, shouting how happy she is while tackling Shion so hard he can barely yell out her name. Pollux clings to his chest and apologizes, blaming the alcohol for being so clingy, though she can't help mentioning that he smells really nice. She looks deep into his eyes and says there's something she's wanted to tell him for a long time, asking if he'll listen while Shion just stands there panicking. Just as she starts to tell him how she really feels, someone ruins the mood by screaming her name at the top of their lungs. It's her brother Castor, who starts lecturing her about being unseemly and tells her to rely on him instead of some weakling, only to get cut off mid-sentence. Pollux calls her brother a total idiot for ruining such a close moment, while Castor rolls around on the ground crying about his shins being shattered. Shion starts to ask her what she was going to say before the interruption, but he thinks better of it and decides that talk will have to wait for another time. Pollux has this terrifying smile on her face as she tells Shion she can't believe he ignored her just to go hit on other girls, making things even worse by telling him he's got some nerve and that she's literally going to kill him. Shion can only sweat and ask why she's so mad. He tries to explain that he wasn't hitting on anyone, but he slips up and says he was just talking to girls instead, immediately realizing he just dug his own grave. Pollux loses it and screams that she's going to beat that attitude right out of him, turning what was supposed to be a simple mock battle into a complete one-sided beatdown that leaves Shion face down on the mat, totally wrecked. Moving on to the next morning, Shion opens up his window and takes a look out at the quiet town, and he starts thinking about Cassandra, wondering why he ever thought he could win against her but feeling glad they were partners through everything. It's been a few days since the whole orc riot went down, and the guild is finally back to running things like normal again. So Shion gets ready to head out with Lime, grabbing a small item and telling himself he should probably bring it along just to be safe. He tucks the item away into his gear, really hoping that he won't actually have to use it for whatever comes next. Now that the path to the cave is finally open again, Shion and Cassandra have come back to make good on the promise they made, standing there at the entrance while Shion looks over at Cassandra and tells her he really believes in her. This is the big moment they've been waiting for. Cassandra looks completely locked in and tells him she knows all the tricks, and there's no way she's going to lose while her partner is standing right there. She walks out into the clearing where Schwain is waiting and apologizes for the delay, asking him how his injuries are healing up. Schwain just crosses his massive arms and says he was actually getting pretty bored, even thinking about heading out to find her himself. He looks her in the eye and says if she's the one who's going to take him down, he couldn't ask for a better way to go. Then he tells her it's time to start. The three of them spread out across the open ground, the tension rising as they prepare for the duel to begin. Lime looks up at Shion and asks if this fight even has a point, and Shion admits he hates seeing his friends get hurt, but they have a promise to keep. He realizes that since Schwain stayed true to his word, it's only right that they do the same for him. Watching Schwain warm up, Shion notes that for a warrior like him, a serious fight against a strong opponent is the ultimate form of respect. Cassandra tells Shion not to worry about her because she's actually been looking forward to this fight herself, and she drops into a low stance across from Schwain as they both get ready to go, finally starting the showdown, where Cassandra's prophecy and flame skills go up against Schwain's crazy berserker strength, making it impossible to tell who has the edge. Since they've fought together before, they already know all of each other's moves, so the whole thing comes down to who can outsmart the other first. Shion watches from the sidelines with a cold sweat, just waiting to see who's going to make the first move. Then they both explode into action at the same time, moving so fast they're basically just blurs on the field. Schwain throws a massive, heavy swing with his blade, but Cassandra is way too quick and zips right past him, showing off speed that makes Lime's head spin, while Shion notices she's already landed the first hit and is forcing the big guy back. She keeps him cornered with a non-stop flurry of strikes, but Shion can see the danger in the way she's pushing, because he knows Schwain is just about to trigger his berserk mode for a massive counterattack, leaving him wondering how Cassandra plans to survive it. Schwain laughs and tells Cassandra she's not bad at all, even going as far as saying if she were an orc, he'd want to propose to her right then and there. Cassandra just smiles and says she doesn't understand a single word he's saying, but she's definitely having the time of her life anyway. She lunges forward to keep the pressure on Schwain, doesn't back down, and gets ready to drop a heavy overhead swing on her. The massive blade slams into the ground with a huge crash, but it turns out the big guy had a different plan in mind. Shion watches from the side and completely loses it, yelling out because he can't believe Schwain actually kicked his own sword to shift its path. Cassandra doesn't even blink, she stays focused through the chaos, looking for the perfect moment to strike while he's open, and Schwain charges right back at her, shouting that she shouldn't think he's the same guy she faced before. But she just zips out of the way like it's nothing, telling him she saw that coming a mile away, leaving the orc totally stunned. He skids across the dirt trying to catch his balance, but he's way too slow to react to what's coming next, and Cassandra rips an upward slash across his chest. Blood sprays everywhere as she finishes the move with perfect timing. Cassandra stands over the defeated orc and explains that if she can just knock him out without a fatal blow, she can stop him from going into a total frenzy. And as Schwain lies there completely beaten, she leans in and tells him that this is officially checkmate. The big guy actually takes it well, admitting it was a total defeat while Cassandra sheathes her blade. He says it was a great final fight and he's got no regrets, which leads to Cassandra looking over at Shion and asking him to translate what the orc is saying. Shion nods and says he's got it covered. Shion turns to Schwain and asks why he didn't just wait for his injuries to heal before starting this fight, but the orc just asks if that's really what he's thinking about. Schwain looks down at his hand and says he should have lost it when that other guy cut it off anyway, so asking him to wait for a full recovery would just be asking for way too much. He looks them right in the eye and tells them to just hurry up and kill him if they're satisfied, because if they let him go, he'll just end up attacking humans again, and he knows they wouldn't want that. Cassandra looks at Shion and tells him she has a request to make, and Shion replies that he was thinking the exact same thing. Shion tells Schwain that if he can just promise to stop attacking humans, then things could be different, but the orc shuts him down immediately, saying that's impossible. He crosses his arms and reminds them that his whole reason for living is to find and fight strong opponents, and he'd rather not live at all if he has to give that up. Shin realizes that if they don't have to get rid of everyone, maybe there's a way for them to coexist. Thinking about that, he decides on a plan and asks Schwain if his only real wish is just to fight strong guys. He points out that those strong opponents don't actually have to be humans, which makes Schwain admit that's true. But he notes that humans are basically the only ones who ever come down into this cave anymore. So Shin smiles and says that's only the case as long as the orc stays stuck in this cave, and then tells him that if he wants a real challenge, he should just come with them. Schwain is completely shocked by the offer, and Shin explains that they're currently ranked third from the top, but they are aiming to reach the absolute highest rank for adventurers, and mentions they travel all over for different jobs. Shin tells him that where they're headed, they'll probably run into enemies even stronger than him or Cassandra, leaving Schwain to ask if they're actually cool with this since he's a different race. But Shin just shrugs it off, saying they already have Lime with them so it's not a big deal, and adds that plenty of adventurers saw him fight against the old chieftain anyway. He assures the orc that nobody back at the guild is going to have a problem with him, and Schwain just looks down and quietly says he understands. Shin wraps things up by asking the orc to come to the surface with them. Schwain thinks about it for a second and says he gets it, and Shin gives him a big thumbs up, telling Schwain it's time to head out. He promises the orc that the world outside is actually a lot of fun, and they shake hands to make it official while Cassandra and Lime watch the new team form. So the group heads back to the city where the town square is packed with people. Just a normal day in the sun, leading to Shin meeting up with Angelina, who's dressed up in nice clothes. She laughs and says he's early, noticing how shocked he looks to see her, but Shin is just confused and asks if she's supposed to be working right now. She smiles and explains that a coworker is covering her shift, so Shin blushes and tells her she looks great in those clothes, admitting he almost mistook her for some noble lady. Angelina starts to get shy, and she mentions it's been forever since they actually hung out outside of the guild. Shin agrees, saying she always seemed so busy whenever he saw her, but Angelina turns it back on him, telling Shin that he's the one who's really been killing it lately since his promotion. Shin gets a bit flustered, and tells her the only reason he's even standing there today is because of what she and another person taught him. Shin mentions how nostalgic it feels to think about that person, while Angelina blushes and remembers how they used to be inseparable whenever they went out, and she brings up a shop she's been wanting to check out all day. Shin smiles, admitting he was thinking the exact same thing. He suggests they head over there right now, but his mind drifts back to how things might have gone wrong if that person hadn't been around, leading to a memory of when the three of them were just starting out as brand new adventurers, standing at the guild counter for the first time. A younger Jason is already acting like a big shot, bragging about how easily he took down a horned rabbit and demanding a tougher request, while Medea glares at him, telling him to shut his mouth because he's being incredibly rude to the guild staff. Shin has to step in and tell them both to knock it off, turning to apologize to Angelina for the scene they're making. Jason just brushes it off and asks if she's taking the rabbit as materials, which leaves Angelina a bit flustered as she explains the reward comes after appraisal. Jason tells her to handle it and calls for the group to move out, leaving the desk behind. Suddenly, a woman named Jessica shows up and remarks that gift holders like them are going to be a real handful to deal with. Jessica asks Angelina if she was even paying attention, then pokes fun at her for being such a cold, overworked former subordinate. But things get weird when Jessica offers to give her a massage for those stiff muscles. Angelina pulls away and tells her she's about to get actually mad. Jessica laughs it off and hands over a canned drink as a peace offering, mentioning it's a new product that's great for fixing exhaustion, and while Jessica starts drinking hers, Angelina takes a sniff of the herb tea and thinks the scent is pretty unique. They sit there for a second before Angelina's expression goes soft, and she admits she's been feeling pretty worried lately. She remembers how Jason and Ath were so set on being adventurers, but the girl aiming to be the god of medicine was different. It made her wonder why that girl would ever team up with people like Shin, whose translator gift didn't seem like it belonged in a dungeon party at all. Jessica listens to the whole thing and just smiles, telling Angelina she should probably just go ahead and ask her about it herself. The conversation gets cut short when Shin suddenly shows up behind them, looking a bit nervous as he asks if he's interrupting anything, which leaves Angelina trying to act professional as she asks how she can help, while Jessica turns around and tells Shin there's something she wants him to see. A black-gloved hand drops a bunch of foraged goods onto the counter. There's a pile of rare mushrooms and strange plants with the roots still on them. Jessica leans way in to get a good look at the loot, clearly impressed by what she's seeing, while Angelina just watches her, wondering what's up with the veteran guild member as she pulls out a lens to inspect a glowing stone. Jessica mentions these items are super rare, the kind of stuff you almost never see even on high-level gathering quests. She starts sweating a bit from the excitement and asks how he even got a hold of this much rare stuff. Shin immediately gets defensive, saying he definitely didn't steal any of it. He reminds them that the guild already knows about his special gift, and explains that the animals he befriended in the woods just showed him where all the good spots were. But Jessica isn't totally sold on it being easy, noting that the ability sounds like a bit of a hassle. Shin agrees, saying he can talk to them, but he still has to handle all the negotiations himself. After thinking it over for a second, Jessica decides they should trade the items for some quick cash and then get Shin started on his official training. She looks Shin in the eye and tells him he's had a pretty lucky start, especially since he finished his very first quest with 0 issues and a bag full of rare materials. Jessica wonders if he even needs the beginner lessons at this point, but Shin gets a serious look on his face. That first trip out into the world made him realize that he needs to get way stronger if he's going to stand by his friend's side, and the only way to do that is to learn everything he can right now. Shin looks down at his hands, feeling the weight of his own weakness. He knows he can't fight like Jason, but he's desperate to catch up to his old friends, even if it's just a little bit. He thinks back to his time in the old party, remembering how Jason led the charge while Asu provided the kind of powerful magic support that he just couldn't match, which is why he's so focused right now. He looks more determined than ever, telling himself he absolutely has to catch up to them. Leaning hard against the guild counter, Shin tells Jessica that his drive is exactly why he's asking her for training. She just smiles, thinking his attitude isn't bad at all. Jessica admits she actually likes people who take things seriously, but then she stops for a second, saying she's just a little curious about one thing. She asks Shin if he can use that gift of his to talk to monsters as well. He doesn't miss a beat, explaining that as long as the creature has a will, he can talk to it. Jessica turns to Angelina with a serious look, calling her Angie, and warning her that Shin is going to be a massive pain to deal with. Angelina just looks confused and asks what she means. Jessica explains that while being able to talk to anything is a huge advantage for gathering information, there's a social side to it that could get messy. For example, she asks her to imagine what people would actually think if they stumbled across an adventurer just standing in a cave, having a casual chat with a monster. Angelina thinks about it for a second and admits it would look crazy. She'd probably assume the guy had lost his mind or was being controlled by an enemy spell. Jessica looks Shin right in the eye and warns him that using his gift carelessly is a huge risk. If he's not careful, he'll just end up getting targeted by other adventurers again, so Shin starts to panic, asking what he's even supposed to do if his only real skill makes him a target. Jessica just puts a hand up to calm him down, telling him to relax and actually listen to the rest of what she has to say. She points out that what he really needs right now isn't more power, but a better reputation. She explains that he needs to focus on building trust with the guild and the Hitori family. The goal is to make as many allies as possible among the local craftsmen and merchants, because Angelina mentions there aren't any big jobs for him to take anyway, and Jessica agrees, wondering what a rookie could even manage on his own. Suddenly, Angelina realizes there's a perfect solution for his problem. Though she looks a little worried about what Jessica might be planning, Jessica gets a wild look in her eyes and tells Shin that she and Angelina are going to beat every bit of knowledge about the guild and this city into him. She stands there looking totally confident, revealing that she's actually a C-rank instructor and wants him to work as her personal assistant. When she asks Shin what he thinks of the idea, his eyes light up and he immediately jumps at the chance, begging her to let him take the job. The following weeks turn into a total blur for Shin. He's constantly on the move, running errands and spending every single day off from his main party following Jessica around. He ends up hauling heavy gear up mountains and studying until his head spins, realizing Jessica is a massive slave driver, but she's actually teaching him the ropes and introducing him to her huge network of contacts. Time flies by and a full year passes. The hard work finally pays off when their group's rank goes up, and Shin's reputation starts to grow as Jason celebrates the party finally hitting D rank. Jason is feeling completely full of himself, waving his new sword around and bragging about how he'll reach A rank in no time. He turns to Shin and tells him he needs to stop hanging out with weak people and actually train, but Shin isn't having it. He reminds Jason that his connections are the only reason that sword even exists. Asu watches them and thinks about how Shin's growth just means she's going to have even more work to deal with. Angelina stands there for a second, deciding that she's going to respect Shin's wishes for now. But Jason isn't letting it go. He huffs and brings up some rumor he heard about an adventurer dying in a party Angelina was supposed to be looking after. Shin tells him to shut it, explaining that once you hit D rank, everything gets way harder and accidents just happen. Jason acts like he gets it for a second, admitting they could get wiped out if they slack off, but then his ego kicks back in and he brags that a guy as great as him would never screw up. As Shin starts walking away, Jason yells out to ask where he's going. Shin just waves him off and says he's headed to a meeting. The scene shifts to a bar where Shin is completely passed out on the counter next to Angelina. Looks like he had a bit too much to drink. He finally groggily wakes up, wondering why he fell asleep. Then he remembers Jessica recommended that specific drink and realizes his head is absolutely pounding. He catches the tail end of a conversation where Jessica is apologizing to Angelina for something that happened. He pipes up and asks the two of them what they're talking about. Jessica keeps going, talking about how a certain party had just made it to D-rank and was so hyped to start making real money while she tries to comfort Angelina, telling her the tragedy wasn't her fault, but Angelina just looks down, saying she doesn't ever want to see anyone else die. Shion looks at Angelina's sad face and asks the obvious question, if the job makes her this miserable, why not just quit? Angelina mumbles into the counter that it's impossible because she actually loves her work, and there are way too many people who depend on her. Shion just nods along, realizing she's too dedicated to walk away. Jessica jumps in to back her up, telling Angelina to have some more confidence because her work really does save people. Angelina gives a small, quiet reply as she starts to feel a bit better about things. As Shion stays passed out on the table, Angelina looks at Jessica with a really worried face and begs her not to end up like the others. She just wants her to stay alive. Jessica just laughs it off with a big grin, saying there's no way she's dying yet. She's already saved up a ton of money for her big goal, so she's got a reason to keep going. Jessica explains she's finally seeing a way to open her own shop and retire, so she's not letting anyone kill her. Angelina thinks that sounds awesome and makes her promise that she and Shion get to be the very first customers. Not long after that night, Jessica officially retired from being an instructor. Around the same time, Shion was moving up the ranks as a solo adventurer, but things were about to change as he ended up taking over Jessica's old job training the new recruits. Everyone got way busier with their own lives, meaning the three of them didn't get to hang out nearly as much as they used to. Angelina was doing great too, eventually earning herself a promotion at the guild. She seemed happy in her new role, always greeting people with a smile, and life felt pretty good for a while. Shion kept pushing himself during training every single day, feeling like everything was finally falling into place. As the days kept moving along, Shion gets called out by someone nearby. It was exactly the kind of thing he'd been worried was coming, and he immediately turns to ask Pollux what happened. She's completely out of breath, struggling to even say Jessica's name, but then she finally manages to blurt out that Jessica was just brought in with some really bad injuries. Pollux mentions the entire guild is in a total panic right now, but Shion doesn't even wait for the details, he just bolts. At the guild entrance, everyone is losing it as they yell for people to clear the way for an emergency. Angelina stands there in total shock, and another girl tells her to look away before she sees too much. But it's too late. A stretcher gets carried past, leaving a trail of blood behind as everyone realizes it's actually Jessica lying there. Shion finally makes it to the scene, looking absolutely panicked as he yells out for Angelina. He finds her safe behind the counter, and someone nearby breathes a sigh of relief that she's at least okay, but Angelina just looks at him, saying the guild staff told her he'd probably show up. Shion is totally out of breath from the sprint, barely able to stand, so Angelina looks away with a heartbroken expression, quietly telling him she's fine and he should just go home for now. Shion stays behind, telling Angelina he can't just walk away when she looks that upset, and Angelina tells him she's willing to listen if he wants to talk, but she suddenly tells him to shut up, catching Shion completely off guard as he says her name. Angelina finally snaps, screaming that she's fine and yelling that Shion is just going to end up dead like everyone else. She keeps going, telling him to stop being so nice and to stay away from her altogether, so Shion just looks at her with a serious expression and tells her straight up that he isn't going to die. Angelina calls him a liar and shouts that people like Lava, Hayes, and Juna all promised the same thing right before they were killed, and she reminds him that even Jessica said everything was going to be totally fine, yet now she might actually die, and the weight of it all makes Angelina collapse to the floor in tears. Shion kneels down to get on her level, quietly saying her name as she sits there broken, and then he looks her in the eye with total confidence, promising her one more time that he absolutely will not die. Shion tells Angelina he's got all the knowledge and experience her old friends taught him, asking her to just trust him. But Angelina looks down, crying as she says that all people like her can really do is watch the adventurers leave, and she feels like everyone else is out there risking it all while she just sits back and prays. Shion tells her that's not it at all, explaining that because she's so good at picking the right quests, they can actually head out into the world feeling safe. He tells her that when things get really rough out there, just thinking about her smile is what keeps them going, so he looks her right in the eyes and asks her to never say that she doesn't do anything for them. Angelina's eyes well up with tears again as she quietly says his name, and then she loses it and hugs him, crying while Jessica watches from the counter. Moving on, Jessica starts laughing about the whole situation, thinking back to how she really thought she was done for, but she can't help but tease Shion about his cheesy "I won't die" line, leaving him hiding his face in total embarrassment. Angelina looks relieved, telling the group she's just really happy that Jessica is safe and sound. Jessica just winks at her with a big smile, saying she did make a promise to her after all. While they talk at the bar, someone points out that Jessica's time as an adventurer is officially over. But it's for the best since she finally opened the shop she always wanted, and turns out it's already a hit with all the local girls. Jessica leans in and whispers to Angelina, asking if the person sitting nearby is actually related to Shion. Shion and Angelina both look completely caught off guard by the question, while at a nearby table, Cassandra is just sitting there with Schwain and Lime. Everyone's shocked to see her hanging out. Cassandra starts blushing, explaining she just happened to walk in and saw them, but didn't want to interrupt their moment. Shion tries to smooth things over by asking Jessica to bring out some food that the whole group can share, so Jessica just grins at him while grabbing a snack, telling him he's definitely picked up some smooth moves lately. Jessica says she'll go place the order while the group heads to the terrace, so Shion just says thanks. He leads the others outside while Jessica waves from the bar. Everyone clinks their mugs together to celebrate finishing the mission, and Shion and Cassandra start digging into a huge spread of food. Schwain stuffs his face while Angelina and Jessica talk nearby. Cassandra asks if these are the comrades Shion made for himself. Saying they seem like a decent bunch, Jessica agrees, though she admits she was surprised he started teaming up with monsters, leaving Lime feeling impressed that the bigwigs actually approved their party despite Shion's achievement. Angelina looks totally exhausted, saying the whole process was a huge ordeal. Jessica then asks if Shion has a name for his party yet, but he and Lime haven't quite settled on one. Cassandra finally tosses out a name for the group Legion, and the others stop to think about how it sounds. Shion likes it but wants to make sure everyone is on board. Cassandra and Schwain are cool with it, and even Lime thinks it sounds tough, so they decide to make it official right then. The whole crew clinks their mugs together in a toast, and Shion announces that from today on, they're officially known as Legion. Later that night, Shion heads back through the city streets under a bright full moon, humming a little tune while he tries to remember where exactly the house is. Lime and Schwain are already checked out, just thinking about food and a place to sleep. As he gets closer to the building, he notices someone standing right by the front door, so he ducks behind a wall to stay hidden. A rat nearby speaks up, telling him that this person has been waiting there since before the sun even went down. Shion thanks his little informant and peeks back around the corner, but then he spots something that makes him freeze. The staff the person is holding looks way too familiar to ignore. He decides to just walk up and face them, stopping a few feet away before asking if she's actually a Sioux. The moon hangs high over the city, lighting up the clouds on a quiet night where a Sioux is waiting right outside. She looks pretty annoyed, calling Shion an idiot and complaining about how long she's been standing there. Shion just stands there frozen, staring at the hooded girl and wondering if it's actually her, but she doesn't waste any time. She says hey and immediately asks if the rumors are true about him leaving the Golden Fleece. Shion is completely caught off guard that she already knows, and before he can even explain, she jumps into his arms. He has no idea what's going on, especially when she starts leaning in close and taking a long sniff. She looks right at him and says he smells like another woman, which totally makes Shion freak out. He's blushing like crazy and asks her what she's even talking about, trying to keep his cool while he stammers. He asks her why she's even hanging out in front of his house at this hour. So Asu finally pulls back and gets a bit more serious, telling him she's there because she needs to ask him for a favor. Shion is sweating and can't believe what he's hearing when Ath asks if he's actually scared of her. She looks him right in the face and tells him she wants him to come to the village of Gorgons with her, and Shion just stands there completely shocked, repeating the name of the place like he can't process it. The mood is heavy, so he tries to break the tension by offering to brew some tea, asking her to just wait a second while Ath gets comfortable and takes off her coat, showing off her rank B gear. While they settle in, Shion gets skeptical and asks if she was part of the group that agreed to kick him out, wondering why she's showing up now with a favor to ask. He hands over a hot mug and warns her to be careful with it, so she takes a sip and asks him to fill her in on what went down while she was gone. Shion realizes pretty quickly that she hasn't even talked to Jason yet. He sits down and explains everything that happened since his exile, including how they started a new guild, but Ath isn't smiling at all. She glares at him and asks if he has even the slightest clue why she's so mad right now. Shion starts sweating, thinking to himself that for some reason he's the one getting scolded right now. He bows his head low and apologizes, telling Ath he honestly just doesn't know what to say. Ath lets out a long sigh and tells him he needs to listen to her for a second, sitting back as she asks if he even bothered to sit down and actually talk things through with Jason. She reminds him that the three of them made a promise back in the day to become heroes together. Ath insists there's no way Jason would ever really want to kick him out of the party, but Shion argues back that Jason specifically told him he wasn't strong enough. He remembers Jason telling him that lately he's only been helping others and looks like he's given up on himself. So Ath explains that Jason is just a total idiot who isn't honest with his feelings. He probably just wanted to motivate him with a kick in the pants. She gets a look on her face and says she bets that stupid woman was the one talking in Jason's ear while she was gone. Ath starts mocking Medea, acting out how she probably told Jason she'd test if Shion was even worthy of their group, convinced that she's the one who filled his head with all that garbage. Ath asks Shion if he didn't already know Jason was a handful since they grew up together, and Shion has to admit that the guy has always been a major pain. He looks away, telling her that even if she's right about how Jason acts, there are just some things people shouldn't say out loud. Shion goes quiet for a second, looking like he's got something heavy on his mind. Ath cuts in, looking down as she explains she's not just pissed at him and Jason. She's actually mad at herself for not seeing how much he was struggling, and she gives him a deep bow, saying she's truly sorry for failing him even though they've known each other forever. After the apology, Ath looks up and asks point-blank if this means he's really not going back to the Golden Fleece party. Shion clenches his fist so hard his arm shakes, telling Ath he's sorry, but he looks her straight in the eyes with a serious face and tells her he has zero intention of ever going back there. Ath lets out a breath and says she gets it, acknowledging that it is what it is, though she adds that he shouldn't get too comfortable, because she's still going to punish both him and Jason properly, which sends a visible chill down Shion's spine. Ath changes the subject, telling Shion she has something else she wants to ask him. She looks a bit nervous as she asks what kind of person Cassandra really is. Shion smiles and says she's a great person, explaining that while she's a little on the shy side, she's super skilled and someone he knows he can count on. Ath sits back on the bed, mentioning it's usually hard to find someone that reliable unless you're dealing with a high-level B-rank guild. She says she's fine for now, and Shion mentions they don't have any guild jobs active anyway. So he asks if it's cool if he checks with his team about things. Ath gives him a soft smile and thanks him, while Shion just looks relieved that things are finally back to normal between them. The night goes on with the full moon hanging high in the sky over the city. Eventually, Ath lets out a big yawn, saying she's completely wiped out from talking for so long. Shion puts his drink down and suggests they head over to the guild together tomorrow morning, and she easily agrees to the plan. Suddenly, Ath starts getting settled right there, saying she's going to bed. Shion starts to freak out, reminding her that this is actually his room, but she just blushes and says it doesn't bother her at all, since they've been sleeping in the same bed since they were little kids. Shion gets all red in the face and starts sweating, shouting that they were only little kids back when they used to share a bed. Ath completely ignores his freakout and just settles under the covers, telling him good night like it's no big deal. Shion tries to stop her, yelling that he's not done talking yet and asking if she's really going to kick him out when he's literally homeless right now. Ath just peeks over the edge of the blanket with a sad look, telling Shion that he's actually being pretty mean to her. That totally works on him, and even though he's still flustered, he sighs and tells her she can stay for just one night. Ath giggles and smiles into her pillow, telling Shion that he's a really kind guy after all. Shion gives in and tells her goodnight, sitting on the floor next to the bed while he helps tuck her in. He looks pretty drained but tells himself it's time to get his own stuff ready so he can finally get some sleep. Just as he starts to move, Ath grabs his sleeve in her sleep and mumbles for him not to leave. Shion just stares down at her, thinking about her as a Sue. He realizes how crazy it is that he came back to find his whole party basically broken up and his other childhood friends still missing. Shion looks pretty bummed out, thinking about how his other half started a new party and left him totally on his own in this town. Ath tells him it's okay and whispers that she's right there for him, while Shion just stays silent, and the sun starts coming up over the big stone building where they spent the night. Shion starts waking up at the table and rubbing his eyes, smelling something cooking and asking what that scent is. And then he lets out a big yawn and says good morning while stretching his back out. Ath says morning to him with a little blush, telling him she made breakfast out of troll meat and herbs to give him some energy. Shion thinks about how it's a new recipe even if the meat sounds weird. But Ath looks worried and asks if she's been a nuisance since he seems so tired. Shion quickly tells her no way and says he was actually just thinking about how nostalgic it all feels. He tells her they should just eat and takes a big bite. Looking completely shocked by the flavor, he's surprised it actually tastes good like pork, while Ath smiles and says she knew it was her best work yet. Shion finishes up his drink, thinking to himself that despite the weird ingredients, the meal was actually great. He sets the mug down and thanks Ath for the food. Ath takes a sip from her own cup and mentions that him coming to them with a job request is a big deal. She notes that it seems like he's finally making some real progress, and then the conversation shifts to Jason, who explains that he picked up some solid info while he was out traveling. He's apparently on a mission to find the stuff needed for a panacea, and Jason makes it clear that he wants to use Shion's specific skills to help him get his hands on it. Back in the present, Shion explains the whole deal to his new crew and asks everyone what they think about taking the job. Shion wonders out loud if a difficult mission means he'll finally get to test himself against someone strong, but Schwain just hopes the whole thing is an easy paycheck. Cassandra isn't feeling it at all and asks Shion if he's really okay with helping out. She points out that these are the same people who kicked him to the curb. Shion tries to wave it off, saying there's a misunderstanding, but Ath jumps in to clarify. She explains that this isn't about the old party, it's a personal request from her. She gets a real serious look on her face and says she never would have let those guys exile him if she had been there. She makes it clear that it never would have happened on her watch, leaving an intense silence between her and Cassandra as they just stare each other down. Shion quickly jumps in to stop the tension, shouting for both of them to pipe down since they're still inside the guild. A voice from the side agrees that he's totally right. Shion is surprised to see Angelina walk up, and she tells him straight up that Asu is on his side. She adds that his credibility as a client is solid, making the whole deal seem a lot more legit. Ath backs this up by promising to pay half the reward as a deposit right now, plus she'll cover all the supplies they need. Angelina says she can personally vouch for him since she's known him since his rookie days, so Shion asks the crew what they think. Cassandra takes a second to think it over and mutters that it looks like they don't really have a choice, so she gives in and officially tells everyone they'll take the job. But then she looks at Shion and asks if he was planning to go on this mission even if the rest of them said no. She says being partners means she can see right through him, but she still checks in to see if Lime and Schwain are okay with the plan. Shion looks pretty stressed out about the situation, but Schwain and Lime are totally on board and ready to go. Cassandra introduces herself to Ath properly, followed by Schwain and Lime giving their names while standing tall. Shion brings out the paperwork to make the contract official, but Ath gets distracted because his voice sounds way too familiar. As they walk through town, Shion wonders about the sister Ath mentioned earlier while she points out a shop nearby. Schwain takes the chance to check out some new gear, testing the edge of a massive blade at a local stall. Later at the library, Angelina checks in on Shion to see if he found anything scary in the old files he's digging through. The records describe a terrifying monster made by demons that's strong enough to eat straight through mithril. Shion points out that the last place this thing was seen is right by their destination, though Angelina hopes she's just overthinking old rumors. She can't help but sweat a little, warning him about the danger of running into an A-rank monster out there. Shion just laughs it off, telling her that if something that scary shows up, he's just going to grab Ath and run for it. Shion feels a lot better knowing they have reliable allies with them now. Schwain and Lime grunt in agreement as Shion promises he'll make sure everyone makes it back in one piece, and just then Ath pulls up in a large horse-drawn carriage and apologizes for the wait. Cassandra is actually pretty shocked, asking if a nice ride like this is really Shion's own personal property since Ath usually goes out gathering in remote areas that don't have stagecoaches. Shion explains that she makes plenty of money on the side, which is how they ended up with their own wheels for the trip. Shion figures he and Ath can just take turns driving the thing. He looks back at the others and tells Cassandra and Schwain they're officially on lookout duty for the ride, and with that he shouts for everyone to get moving. Their goal is the remote Gorgon village, so the carriage starts rolling out across the rocky plains. Once they're on the road, Shion looks back and asks if the two girls want to head inside the carriage to get some rest, but neither of them wants to budge. Cassandra tells Shion he should be the one resting, while Ath insists she's fine and that Cassandra should go inside instead, leaving Shion caught in the middle. Cassandra just sighs and says they should all try their best to get along while they're on this trip together. The journey takes them through all kinds of terrain as they camp and wash up. After traveling for a while, Cassandra peeks out from the back and notices the forest is starting to get really thick. Shion nods to himself and mentions they're almost at the village they're going to use as a base. He figures if everything goes well they'll be there by tonight, but a sudden thud from the back of the carriage catches him off guard as Schwain warns Shion they've got guests coming. He sniffs the air and says he doesn't smell anyone strong, but he's still down for some fun. And just then the group realizes they're being surrounded by a massive swarm of Mitango monsters. Schwain jumps down to handle it while Shion yells out that they don't want any trouble. He asks the creatures to just let them through, but it's no use. Shion can tell the leader won't listen to reason and figures something must be wrong with Nyan-shun, so Schwain steps to the front and tells Shion to just leave the fighting to him. Shion shouts a warning about the poison as Schwain starts swinging his big blade to clear the way, and Cassandra jumps in too, saying she'll make sure the carriage stays protected. She tells Shion she's on it and lets loose a burst of energy to blast the mushroom monsters back. Angelina is shocked seeing a massive wall of fire taking out the monsters, and Shion just looks over, asking if she sees how amazing Cassandra is, but it's not just her. Schwain is moving so fast he's like a black wind, showing off some crazy power as he rips through the swarm, And even with all that, Shion realizes there are just way too many enemies for them to handle like this. Cassandra asks Shion what the plan is, and he's about to answer when everyone notices something weird happening. The monsters are starting to bubble and melt together. Shion sees the danger and yells for Schwain to fall back immediately as the ground starts shaking. The group pulls back just in time to see a massive, gross blob forming, and Shion screams out asking what the hell the thing even is. It turns out all those monsters they just beat are merging into one giant creature, and Shion can't even believe what he's looking at. Someone tries to blast it with wind magic, but Shion yells that they can't just leave the thing alone to grow. Cassandra stares down the massive beast and says they need to finish it off right now before it gets any worse. The others ask how they're supposed to manage that, and she points out that if she uses her full power, the entire forest is going to get wiped out too, which Shion realizes is a huge problem. The massive mushroom monster lets out a loud roar that shakes the whole forest. Shion stares it down, thinking that no matter how big it gets, it's still got a core hidden somewhere. He keeps his eyes locked on the beast, knowing he just needs one clean shot to bring it down. Angelina starts casting while Schwain tells the enemy they aren't looking for a chat, and Shion looks at both of them, asking for their help so they can finish this thing together. Just then, the group notices the monster's arm is bubbling and shifting into something even worse. It looks like the creature is actually sucking magic right out of the ground to stay strong. The beast swings a massive limb down, smashing the earth and barely missing the party as Shion realizes this thing is way faster than it looks. While Cassandra asks what the plan is, he tells her to keep the monster busy until he gives the signal, and she says to leave it to her. Shion yells for everyone to listen up as they regroup for a final push. The monster swings a massive, heavy arm that rips through the trees nearby. Shion tells Angelina to buff his attack, and she starts her chant. Schwain says he can feel a crazy amount of power surging through him, while Shion tells Schwain it's time to move and the orc replies he's ready. Energy starts swirling around Shion's sword as he prepares for a big strike. He dives straight down from the air, aiming a heavy blow at the monster. The massive beast looks stunned as the force of the hit lands right on its face. Cassandra keeps the thing distracted while Shion lets loose a huge wind blade, shouting that they're ending this today, as Schwain stands back catching his breath. Shion puts everything into a massive swing that carves a giant hollow circle right through the center of the monster's chest. Angelina watches in shock, wondering if that single hit was enough to finish it, but Shion keeps his guard up and says it's not over yet. The creature's flesh starts stretching and pulling back together as someone realizes the beast is actually still alive, and trying to heal, Schwain spots a glowing core deep inside the monster's mess of regenerating meat and decides to make his move. He grips his weapon as dark energy swirls around his hand, then launches himself into a wild, spinning air attack. Shion starts sprinting forward to help, shouting that he's coming to save him, but Cassandra grabs him and tells him to just wait and watch. A blade sinks perfectly into the monster's core, and Schwain just sits there with a smirk, letting out a little laugh because the giant beast finally starts to dissolve into nothing, and Shion raises his sword high, cheering that he finally did it. Later, Shion stands over Schwain while the orc catches his breath, telling him he can't believe how fast he reacted in that split second. Schwain just shrugs it off, saying he got lucky and just aimed for the loudest part, while Cassandra walks by and tells him he did a good job. The giant monster is finally down and melting into a puddle, so Cassandra turns to Shion and asks what his plan is for the mess. Shion looks at the remains and thinks it would be a waste to just leave it there, so he tells her he's got a pretty good idea. The group starts winding down as someone yells that it's finally over, and Angelina calls everyone over because she's finished cooking. She tells Shion she's made another masterpiece, and he says he's actually hyped to try it. But things get weird when the whole crew, Schwain, Lime, and even Cassandra, stand there looking completely nervous about what's in the pot. Everyone stares at the bubbling soup, and someone asks if she really used those monster mushrooms as the main ingredient. The group wonders if this stuff is even safe to eat, but they figure they might as well just go for it and see. Schwain and Lime stare at the skewers like they're preparing for battle, while Cassandra just looks at the food with total doubt. As soon as they take a bite, Cassandra's eyes go wide in shock, and Schwain immediately yells out that the food is actually amazing. He says he could eat this stuff forever, and even Cassandra admits it's frustrating how much she actually likes the meal. Cassandra is still in shock that Shion actually turned those monsters into a meal, so Shion explains that his gift lets him know exactly how to clean and prep any ingredient. As Angelina hands out more soup, she points out that Shion has really changed since they started traveling together. Shion isn't so sure and asks if she really thinks so, but Angelina is serious, telling him she's noticed he never used to fight this well back when he was still with his old party. Shion takes a second to think about it and says if he really has improved, it's mostly thanks to having people he can actually trust. He clenches his fist and admits he finally realized he actually had potential to grow. Angelina looks away and just gives a quiet reply, but looking down at her bowl, She realizes she's actually feeling a bit frustrated seeing how far he's come without her. Shin notices her mumble and asks if she said something, but she just brushes him off and says it's nothing at all. Moving on, Shin tells the group they need to start taking turns resting so they're ready for tomorrow. But then Cassandra suddenly freezes. Shin hears it too, cupping his ear as he tries to figure out if he's actually hearing someone singing out in the dark. The whole group goes on high alert as Shin wonders if it's just villagers, while Angelina asks who would even be out this late at night. Cassandra decides they should go check it out, so Angelina tells them not to push it and to regroup once the barrier is set. Shin says he's got it, and the two of them start pushing through the thick bushes and grass to find the source. Shin points ahead and notes there's an open space just up the path, and Cassandra realizes the singing they've been hearing is coming from that exact same spot. As they get closer, Cassandra asks Shin what he's seeing, but he just stays quiet while he looks through the trees at a wide clearing under the bright full moon, where they finally spot something incredible. There's a girl standing on a rock with her back to them, glowing with a strange light. Shin is blown away by her beautiful singing voice, while Cassandra notices that even the air around her seems to be sparkling. But then Shin stops for a second, getting the feeling that there's something really familiar about that voice. He calls out to see if someone is there, making the girl totally freak out as she wonders if he actually noticed her standing there. Perseus laughs to himself, admitting he thought he'd hidden his presence perfectly. While the girl is just shocked Shin actually spotted her. Perseus strikes a dramatic pose and claims it must be the power of love, leaving the girl standing there in total silence. Shin starts breaking a sweat, realizing there was actually another person hiding in the woods this whole time, and Perseus looks pretty smug as he says he knew it was her. But she just calls him by name and tells him eavesdropping doesn't suit him at all. He starts calling her his songstress and says she's as beautiful as ever. She just looks completely grossed out by him. Perseus drops to one knee and keeps up the act despite her saying she hates him, so she just yells at him, demanding to know why he's even there. He tells her the reason is obvious and starts going on about how her eyes sparkle just like the stars. He doesn't stop there, moving on to praise her sun-bright hair and how her little snaggle teeth are actually super cute. He claims he's only there to make sure he doesn't miss a single moment of her beauty, but the girl is just totally over it, and Perseus looks completely clueless as he asks what's wrong with his princess. The group watches the scene from the bushes, and Cassandra asks if those two were actually the ones singing earlier, while Shin mentions he heard the words princess and knight, thinking it might be a secret meeting. Angelina adds that it looks like a tryst between people of different social classes, like some kind of forbidden romance. Cassandra watches them closely and notes that it doesn't look like a fairy tale at all to her, it just sounds like the two of them are in a huge fight. The girl in the kimono screams at Perseus that he's just in the way and tells the stalker to just go home, but Perseus seems to be into it, blushing and shouting for her to give him more insults. He suddenly changes the subject, saying he doesn't know who they are or where they came from, but looking right at their hiding spot, he says eavesdropping isn't very admirable and tells them it's time to show themselves. The group stands up with their hands in the air. Angelina immediately asks for forgiveness, while Shin tries to play it off by saying the singing was so beautiful he couldn't move. Perseus thinks that's a great attitude to have, but then gets serious and asks who they are and what they're doing in the forest. Shin explains that they're just adventurers on a job from Corinthos, looking for ingredients for a new potion. Perseus listens to their story and says it's a long trip to take, so they have his sympathy, but he warns them that they probably won't find those materials in these borderlands. Shin speaks up to explain their side, making Perseus ask who he is. Shin holds up a crest and introduces himself as Asclepius from the Panacea Guild, saying he researches medicine and came here for a rare material. The girl in the kimono spots the crest and realizes she's seen it in town before. Angelina asks Shin if he's sure about this, but he decides they should just tell the truth, so he reveals the material he's looking for is actually the blood of a monster known as a Gorgon. Perseus completely loses his cool and demands to know what Shin just said, while nearby, the girl repeats the words under her breath. Her hands start shaking as she asks what he meant by that, and suddenly her hair turns into hissing snakes. She screams that the people who kidnapped her sisters were pointing right at Shin's group. She yells that it was them and says she'll never forgive them. Perseus is losing it over the kidnapping claim, while Shin tries to explain it's all a big misunderstanding, but the guy just reaches for his weapon, saying it's useless to talk because you can't reason with the girl once she's like this. He draws a massive curved sword and tells them to take it as a mercy, because they're about to be nothing but rust on his blade. Shin wonders what kind of sword that even is, but he makes it clear he's not just going to stand around and get killed, so Perseus suddenly lunges forward with a crazy burst of speed, catching Shin off guard for a second. Cassandra moves in and blocks the strike perfectly, telling him she knew he was going to try something like that while Angelina watches. Perseus catches a glimpse of her hair and completely freezes up, asking her if she's actually a demon. She doesn't even care and asks him if he's finally ready to sit down and talk since he's dealing with a demon now. Instead of fighting, Perseus starts shaking and calls her pitiful, saying she must have gone through a lot of pain herself. He looks her right in the eyes and asks if she's really trying to say that she's the one acting as the hunter now. The clash between Perseus and Cassandra gets intense. Perseus grumbles that the whole fight is just going in circles, but Shion is actually worried. He's never seen Cassandra get pushed back like this, and he can tell Perseus is moving way faster than any normal B ranker would. Angelina screams Shion's name. She can see the situation is turning south fast, especially since Cassandra has to put everything into her strikes just to keep the guy busy. He's barely holding her off as they trade heavy hits. She tells Shion she's got this guy covered, and that he needs to quit watching and go help the kimono girl before things get worse. Shion takes off running, but just as he gets close, the girl looks up and says she's unleashing her demon eye, and her eyes start glowing with this weird light as she shouts for him to turn into stone. Shion tries to block the glare, but he's a second too late. The petrification hits his arm and starts spreading instantly. He stands there for a second, looking down at his hand, which is now completely made of rock. The weight of it is holding him back, and the girl notes he clearly knew about her power, though she mentions he wasn't quite fast enough to dodge it. Shion realizes that if he hadn't prepped some counters ahead of time, that last move would have been a disaster. He just hopes Cassandra and the others are doing all right. Perseus stands there looking pretty smug, admitting that the mirror shield trick actually managed to catch him off guard, and the girl clicks her tongue, clearly annoyed. He asks Shion what his next move is, saying that if he just repents and returns the people he took, he might actually convince the princess to let Shion live. But Shion isn't backing down at all. He tells the guy it's way too early to be making big speeches like that while Perseus completely loses his cool, shocked that Asclepius is still standing. He can't wrap his head around why the petrification didn't work. Shion quickly uses a healing spell to fix the damage to his arm, thanking Angelina for stepping in and saving him just in time. Angelina calls out for Schwain to make his move, and the big guy is more than ready to jump into the middle of the fight. Shion tells them they're total lifesavers as Schwain charges right at the enemy, catching everyone by surprise as a small object falls through the air, a clear sign that Shion's plan is finally coming together. He grabs the girl's arm and lets her know they were lucky enough to analyze her power, meaning her evil eye isn't going to work on them anymore. The kimono girl speaks up, asking everyone if they can just put their swords away for a second so things don't get even worse. But Shion isn't done yet, telling the group he still wants to try and have a real conversation with them before anyone else gets hurt. He turns to Schwain and tells him not to kill the guy, while the orc just cracks his knuckles and says he's got the situation handled. Perseus is absolutely losing it, unable to believe that Shion is actually out here giving orders to an orc warrior like it's nothing. The guy tries to keep it together, insisting that as the princess's knight, there's no way he can just give up and walk away from this. Schwain doesn't give him the chance to finish, charging in and slamming Perseus into the ground with one massive hit. Looking down at the defeated knight, someone wonders out loud if that guy was really worth all the trouble they just went through. Cassandra sheathes her weapon, admitting that for some reason she just couldn't find her rhythm during that entire mess, while Shion reaches out to the Gorgon girl, asking her if she's finally ready to sit down and talk this out now that the fighting's over. The girl looks down and gives in, saying she'll talk as long as they promise not to kill her knight, finally ending the standoff. Shion watches as the group starts to calm down, thinking to himself that he never planned on things going any other way. The group moves the conversation to a quiet watermill house nearby, tucked away by a waterfall under the moonlight. Once inside, Perseus slams his head onto the floor in a massive apology, and it turns out he used to be a B-rank solo adventurer. Cassandra tells him to just forget about it since they all survived. While Shion looks over and asks if everyone can agree on that, the girl agrees that talking things out is definitely the best way to handle this, so Shion decides it's time to get down to business. She suggests they start over with some proper introductions to clear the air, sitting there with Perseus while Shion introduces himself as the leader of the B-rank party known as the Legion, originally from the city of Corinth. The girl brings out some hot drinks for everyone, hoping that the taste is actually to their liking. Shion takes a huge gulp while she watches him, looking pretty surprised by how quickly he's making himself at home. She leans in and asks Shion if he's secretly a monster tamer, a question that catches him totally off guard. Shion clears things up by explaining his gift is actually the universal translator, though a voice from the side claims he's got it all wrong. He keeps going, saying he can only hear and talk to animals or monsters without any real power to control them. Medusa listens, asking if that's really the case, wondering if the creatures following Shion are actually doing it out of their own free will. Shion just smiles and tells her that's exactly right, they're his precious comrades, and Medusa seems genuinely shocked to find out he's telling the truth. Perseus starts yelling about how it's not fair Shion can understand the princess, but Angelina quickly tells him to shut up, The girl finally introduces herself properly as Medusa from the Gorgon village of Gree, explaining that her eyes used to turn anyone she looked at into stone, at least until recently. She mentions how easily Shion dispelled that curse, and Angelina tells her she can just call him as for short. But Angelina still has one big question on her mind. She wants to know what kind of medicine he used on Shion earlier. Shion says he knows how hard it is, while Angelina points out that even top-tier mages have a rough time breaking curses, but she's still caught off guard by how he handled everything so fast, especially since he just threw that potion together on the fly. She admits she never saw anyone pull off a stunt like that back when she was an adventurer, so Shion starts to explain that the secret is actually right in front of them, pointing out a few specific bottles that Medusa notices are all different colors. Medusa looks pretty confused, asking what he means by bringing up the potion bottles like that. Shion decides to break it down for everyone, and Angelina joins in to explain how they prepared specifically for meeting a Gorgon. He explains how he adjusted the ingredients to find the best mix, preparing several different versions just to deal with the petrification problem. While holding up a petrified mushroom, he tells them that after looking at the actual analysis results, they spent a ton of time digging through old books and stories to find a way to make it work, leading to Angelina working at the table as the magic circle glows bright. A single drop of the new potion falls onto the petrified mushroom. It instantly starts changing back to its original form, and Angelina tells everyone to watch closely as it happens. Shion stands there confidently, finally revealing that his unique gift is called Child of the Medicine God, which gives him the power to analyze and cure basically any disease, curse, or poison, plus he can whip up the meds himself. Perseus completely loses it, asking if Shion is actually one of those famous members from the Golden Fleece group. He realizes that's why everything sounded so familiar, while Angelina just listens to him piece it all together. Perseus explains that even in his far-off hometown, they've heard stories about that group being a bunch of rising stars with insane gifts. Shion asks Medusa if this is enough proof that he's not going to do anything shady with her blood, while Perseus says it's a huge honor just to meet him. Medusa looks a bit unsure, mentioning how her blood is known for being a straight-up deadly poison to any human who touches it. Shion tells her she's only half right. Turns out when her kind transforms, that poison actually flips into a powerful healing agent. Shion says he became totally sure about the secret after checking out the real thing, while Medusa admits that even in her own village, only a few people actually know the truth about her blood, and she can't believe Shion actually managed to figure the whole thing out on his own. Perseus stands there looking pretty impressed, thinking about how crazy it is that the princess's blood was hiding a secret like that, and he starts going on about how being a knight is such a huge responsibility, which just makes Shion tell him he's really something else. Shion shifts the topic, mentioning he heard Perseus used to be an adventurer himself, then points out that Cassandra is a top-tier fighter even for a B rank. So he asks how Perseus actually managed to stop her, since Perseus knows for a fact his normal sword skills wouldn't have been enough. Perseus explains that he just got lucky with the weapon matchup, leading Shion to ask if he's talking about that weirdly shaped sword sitting right there. Perseus confirms it, bragging that the sword is named Harp and it's a masterpiece he made with his creator gift to be a monster slayer, because he originally built the thing just to stand a chance against Gorgons, but it ended up saving him in a way he never saw coming. Shion finally gets it, realizing the sword is actually a slayer of female monsters, which explains exactly why it worked so well against Cassandra earlier. Shion points out that under normal circumstances, a regular monster wouldn't even be able to move, yet Cassandra actually forced him to pull out his trump card, the Mirror Shield. He tells her that alone is pretty impressive, and then he turns to Perseus, asking why someone with that kind of skill would ever retire, especially since Shion's own gift is just a massive money pit. Perseus explains that life in the city was getting way too stressful, then mentions he only came back because his partner ended up causing some big scandal. Hearing that, Shion winces and says it sounds like a complete disaster, but Perseus doesn't seem to mind at all and laughs it off, saying it was actually lucky because it led him to his princess, leaving Shion and Medusa just staring at him with blank faces. The conversation gets serious as Shion brings up the old non-aggression pact between Dany village and Medusa's hometown, noting that even though a few people used to hang around to trade goods back in the day, all that movement had totally died out by the time he returned. It turns out a weird sickness hit the village and stopped all the trade, and with monsters suddenly swarming the roads, nobody was coming or going. Perseus adds that since he didn't know the first thing about medicine, he left the healing to the experts and spent all his time on guard duty. Perseus starts acting all dramatic again, striking a pose and yelling about how this was his big fateful meeting with the songstress. He tries to go on about the moonlit night, but Medusa shuts him up physically while Shion tells him to knock it off since they're trying to talk. Medusa gets serious, explaining that people have been vanishing from her village lately, and even though everyone searched, they couldn't find a trace of them. She looks down, looking pretty devastated as she mentions that even her own older sister has disappeared lately. Moving on, she explains that she heard a stranger had shown up at the human village and went to check it out, hoping to find the kidnapper, but she just found Perseus. She still hasn't found the actual culprit, and instead of solving the mystery, she just ended up with this weird guy following her everywhere. So she decided her only choice was to act as bait to lure the kidnapper out, which Shion finally starts to understand. Angelina notes they didn't see anyone suspicious on the road, and Shion points out that Perseus and Medusa are the only people they've seen at all. Perseus adds that nobody in his village is actually strong enough to pull off kidnapping Gorgons, which makes things even weirder. Shion clenches his fist as the realization hits him. There's really only one possibility left for who's behind all this. Shion looks over at Angelina as the truth hits him. If the Gorgons are being taken without a fight, it means there's a traitor in the tribe. The moon hangs high over the clouds as the night goes on. Shion hops out of the carriage to find Angelina waiting by the campfire. She tells him good work and asks where Asu is hiding. Shion sits down and explains he let him sleep since he burned through way too much magic. Angelina just nods, taking it in while Shion keeps talking. He says even if she was ready for a fight, things were just too crazy back there. He points out that analyzing a B-rank curse on the fly and trying to cook up a cure right then, and there was a massive ask. Angelina stares at her reflection in her blade, thinking about how insane Shion's skills are compared to hers. She feels useless since she couldn't even buy them some time, and admits they don't exactly deal with magic swords every day. She grips her sword tight, looking pretty annoyed with herself, and says the whole thing is just super frustrating. She starts worrying about what happens if they get stuck in a spot like that again, especially if there isn't a healer nearby to save them. Suddenly, she stands up with a look of total focus, telling Shion she's finally made up her mind about what she needs to do. Cassandra looks Shion right in the eyes with total resolve, saying that even if she can't use her special powers, she's still going to prove she can hold her own in a fight, which leads Shion to lean in and tell her he's just really glad she's his partner. The sudden compliment catches her completely off guard, leaving her totally stunned while she tries to pull herself together, asking him what's gotten into him all of a sudden. Shion doesn't back down though, looking past her toward the future. He explains that the world of A rank and higher is exactly where they're heading, and it was Cassandra who finally made him see that. Cassandra starts laughing it off, teasing him about how it's only natural since he's the partner of the legendary Return of the Demon King. Shion just sighs, telling her those are nothing but baseless rumors, but she gets serious again, mentioning she heard plenty of talk about the Legion on her way here. Apparently, the guild has already made sure everyone around Corinth knows who they are, and Shion realizes the pressure is on. He crosses his arms, thinking about how one wrong move could turn them from the hunters into the ones being hunted. Knowing the stakes, Shion decides he wants to do more than just finish the job. He says that while getting the blood was all Asu asked for, he really wants to fix the relationship with the Gorgons for good, since making a real connection with the Gree would be a huge win for the Legion in the long run. Cassandra just sits by the fire, watching the flames as the night goes on. Cassandra catches Shion off guard with a smirk, calling him out by saying that deep down, he just wants to save those girls, which totally flusters Shion as she laughs it off, telling him she knew it all along and that it's way more like him to act that way. She tells him not to worry because everyone else is going to feel the same way about it, and gets a serious look in her eyes. She makes him a promise that if he ever looks like he's about to make the wrong choice, she'll do whatever it takes to stop him, so as long as he stays on the right path, she'll be the sword that fights for him. Shion can only say her name in response, but he eventually smiles and thanks her, agreeing that's exactly what being partners is all about as they lock in with a fist bump. The next morning, Asu steps out of the tent with a huge yawn and greets the rest of the group, and Cassandra is already up and moving, greeting her back while bringing over some warm bowls of food for breakfast. Schwain shows up too, lugging a massive beast he caught over his shoulders and asking Shion if he managed to get some good rest. Asu just gives a tired but happy smile, saying she slept like a log thanks to everyone looking out for her. Everyone gathers around the table as breakfast is served, and it's finally time to eat. While they eat, Cassandra lays out the next move, saying they'll use Dany village as a base to start gathering intel, focusing their efforts on finding and rescuing the people who were taken. Schwain is totally on board with the plan, and Angelina speaks up next, asking the group how her specific plans for their stay in the village sound to them. The group heads out, following the road as their carriage pulls up to the entrance of Dany village. Perseus is already there waiting for them, calling out a big welcome to the members of the Panacea Company. Angelina gives a polite bow and thanks Lord Perseus for coming all the way out just to greet her, so Perseus tells them to bring the carriage along as he leads the way, offering to guide them straight to the chief's place. Shion looks back at the crowd of villagers watching them pass by with a bit of an awkward feeling. They arrive at a large building, and Perseus explains that this is the village chief's house and the local meeting hall. A pair of boots clicks against the floor as someone approaches the group, calling out to see if Perseus is there. It's the village chief's daughter, Andromeda, who walks in demanding to know if Perseus is the one making all this noise. Shion asks if she should even be out of bed yet, but Andromeda just laughs it off, saying that special medicine worked like a charm and she feels totally fine. Watching the interaction, Angelina steps in and politely asks Lord Perseus if he wouldn't mind introducing everyone to each other. Perseus introduces Andromeda to the team, and she immediately turns to Shion wondering if she's the adventurer that Pell was talking about earlier. Shion plays along with the disguise, introducing herself as Asclepius and explaining that she's a medicine merchant from the city. She then signals to the real Shion to bring over the usual supplies they carry, leading to Perseus and Andromeda looking into the crate as it glows with high-grade items, leaving Andromeda wondering if this doctor is actually the real deal. Perseus is blown away by the quality of the gear, while Andromeda feels a bit awkward, asking if it's really okay for them to just take all this stuff. Shion just gives a kind smile and says this is exactly what they deal in, insisting they take it as a gift to start their new friendship off right. Andromeda thanks the group for the help and asks if they're here to see her father. She tells Pell to show everyone to the dining room while she goes to find him, and Pell tells her he's got it covered. As they walk, Shion asks why the girl is up and moving if she was supposed to be bedridden. She figures there has to be some kind of secret behind that miracle cure, so she suggests they talk to the chief first. They meet the man in charge who welcomes Asclepius and the guards to their remote home, introducing himself as Cepheus, the official chief of Dany village. He tells them they shouldn't just stand around after such a long trip and invites everyone to take a seat. Once they're settled with some drinks, he mentions he's sure they've heard the rumors about their situation, but he explains they used to trade with the other village until the Gorgon showed up at a meeting and just started attacking people. Everything was fine before that, but Cepheus looks pretty shaken as he explains how things just changed one day. The chief mentions he heard a traveling merchant sold the village a special antidote, but Andromeda looks pretty stressed just hearing about it. He explains that his daughter was poisoned back then and almost didn't make it. He admits it's a miracle no one has died yet, but if this keeps up, it's only a matter of time before things get real bad. Andromeda changes the subject, mentioning she heard their escorts are big-deal adventurers, and Angelina confirms Shion is a top-tier guy in the city. Shion thanks her for the intro and tells them his name, while Angelina lets the chief know he leads a B-rank party called the Legion. He introduces Cassandra as their swordswoman and points out she's a half-demon, telling them she's the partner he trusts most of all. Then he introduces Lime, who apparently handles the healing for their group. The villagers look absolutely floored seeing a slime on his shoulder, while Perseus just stands there watching the drama. Shion admits he can't blame them for being shocked, but Lime just smiles and tells everyone he's not a bad slime, so Shion promises the little guy is just a harmless healer and they have nothing to worry about. Shion mentions there's one more person to introduce. His name is Schwain, an orc warrior who was back there guarding the carriage while a little kid from the village walks up and starts patting the side of the massive beast they brought along. The kid looks up and sees Schwain's scary face staring back, which leaves the little guy totally frozen in shock. Andromeda grabs the kid and pulls him back while Schwain just stands there looking confused about the whole reaction. The villagers start whispering, asking Shion if he actually tamed monsters and demons, but Shion just tells them he doesn't have that kind of crazy power. He explains that his gift is called devilry, which simply lets him gain the trust of demons through conversation and respect. Cassandra gets all flustered and yells that she doesn't follow him because of some gift, while Angelina just smiles and says she's believed in him from the start. So just like that, Shion offers to help the village out with their major Gorgon problem. The chief looks incredibly relieved and says they really appreciate it, since they were just talking about scraping their money together for a guild request. So Shion asks if they can help guard the place for now, and the chief promises they'll make sure there's a solid reward waiting. Shion nods along, letting everyone know he's got the hang of the situation and is ready to get to work. A few days pass by as the group settles into the village life and starts helping out with the local defense. One of the locals sets down some simple soup and bread, apologizing that this is really all they can offer for now. Shion tells her not to worry because they've been stuck eating dry rations anyway, so he's actually super grateful. The woman tells them to just shout if they need anything else, and Angelina promises she'll let her know if something comes up. Once they're alone, Shion mentions that Schwain and the rest of the guys are still out on patrol, but he wants to go over the details they've found, explaining how he spent the last few days with the guards and hasn't spotted any big groups nearby. The village hasn't seen any signs of an attack lately, and Angelina points out that the local guards are actually way more skilled than they look. Shion admits he's honestly shocked at how fast the villagers and the guards started getting along with Lime and the others, especially since It was a huge gamble to just show up with a group of monsters like that, but he's relieved that everything turned out okay. Angelina turns the conversation to a more serious topic, saying it's time to go over the report regarding the victims from the last incident. Shion finishes up his checkup on Andromeda and the other villagers who were attacked, and Angelina can't help but notice how high-level that miracle cure actually is. But Shion points out that while everyone looks perfectly fine to a regular person, even though the villagers are walking around with plenty of energy, this whole recovery is nothing but a total front. He explains that the poison is still sitting inside their bodies and they're only stalling it, meaning the medicine could fail at any moment, and Angelina is caught off guard, asking if even someone with Shion's level of power isn't able to just fix the problem. Shion admits he can treat them, but he thinks it's way too dangerous to show their hand while they still have no idea who is behind this, which Angelina has to agree with, especially since they're still basically flying blind. For now, Shion decides they'll just pass out some of his special tea to give the locals a little stamina boost, mainly just to mess with whoever did this. But he knows they really need to track down the people responsible before this situation drags on too long. There is one lead though, the fact that the antidote used on the villagers actually had a very specific type of blood inside it. Angelina realizes the gravity of the situation and asks if this means the attackers are actually linked to the village traitor. Shion confirms that's likely the case, especially if they're dealing with the same person who used the poison before, and Cassandra mulls over the idea of a Gorgon poison user, noting that this kind of threat is way above what a B-rank adventurer usually handles. Even so, she gets fired up and says it's the perfect time to show what they can really do. Shion and Angelina are both on board, agreeing to give it everything they've got as they prepare for the next move. Angelina asks what the plan is from here, and Shion tells her he's set on checking out that hidden village. He thinks he might even tell the village chief he can use his special gift to try and negotiate with the people there. Angelina points out the mysterious merchant probably isn't showing up anyway, so they might as well dive right into the lion's den to end this quickly. Cassandra mentions that if they're really going to that hidden village, they're definitely going to need Perseus to help them out. And while Shion wants to avoid a messy head-on fight if possible, Cassandra insists they at least get their gear ready for whatever's coming. The group is just finishing their talk about moving out tonight when a loud bang at the door cuts them off. A guy from the village named Timos comes bursting in, looking completely frantic as he shouts about finally finding them. He's sweating and can barely breathe, but he manages to yell out that there's a huge emergency and they need to move fast. Shion grabs him to steady him and tells him to take a second to breathe, asking what exactly is going on, so Timos gets it out. Apparently a whole horde of trolls has shown up in the forest right on the edge of the village. The massive creatures are already stomping through the trees, ready to wreck everything.